But your children were dying!
Only a few. Does that sound cruel?
There we go. Let me just put Do Not Disturb on, because for some reason fucking people keep calling me, and that's great. That's good to know people like me. But sometimes it's just spam, and I don't fucking care anymore.
That's how it...
I'm gonna start calling the police.
That's how it be sometime. I'm gonna move my microphone a little closer to me. It seems a little far. So
that is how it be sometimes. Here at the Waffle Press Retrospective, failed fantasy blockbusters. I'm your host, Diego Crespo. With me today is my co-host, as always, Matt Garingo.
That's me.
We're here to talk Dragonslayer.
1981's
Dragonslayer, directed by Matthew Robbins. We're going to jump directly into the movie because I'm going to take a little constructive criticism from people that say, hey, maybe we bullshit a little too much at the beginning. No, there will be plenty of bullshit today. Don't mind you, there will be plenty.
All those people are wrong. If anyone's made that complaint, they're not a real listener of the podcast. It's what we do.
That is true.
We take forever I just felt a little... get to the movie, and then we go, oh yeah, it was good, and then we end the podcast.
I will just say, I just felt a little bad because someone was like, oh, I wanted to hear people talk about Dark City because my favorite movie, and these people are talking about fucking Hawkeye. And I just felt a little bad.
Look, that's how it be. I'm sorry. That's how it be. I got a lot to say about Hal Barwood, the writer of this film. So, we're going to talk about the fucking adventure genre of video games for a little bit at some point. But yeah, Dragonslayer. This feels like a movie that, like, unfairly, I don't hear anyone talking about.
I don't either. So here's the thing. So fantasy fail blockbusters. Fantasy stuff, dark fantasy especially, it hasn't had like a huge comeback. Like there's Game of Thrones, there's House of the Dragon. Obviously that stuff is
now everything
at the height of pop culture, right?
Everything is Game of Thrones now. Like that's the culture makers have decided that if you're going to do fantasy, it has to be Game of Thrones inspired to some extent. Including like the fucking Lord of the Rings show that Amazon's doing that no one watches.
Yeah, produced directly by one of the people that George R. R. Martin crowned one of the three heads of the dragon. You know, Brian Cogman, I think.
Oh, really?
Is his name. Yeah, he's like one of the showrunners or the executive producers on it, something like that. Or at least was around to get it off the ground. Like, he's kind of like they were looking for someone to guide that ship for 5 seasons. I don't know if he's still part of it. I haven't watched it. I've heard mixed reception. I was just invited to a for your consideration screening of the finale of the second season, I think. I haven't seen any of the show, so I didn't go.
Yeah.
And then we were talking before the show, I was supposed to go watch Nosferatu, and then didn't get to watch that either. Thanks, Beyond Fest.
I was in a room of people recently where Lord of the Rings came up. People were like, "Oh, you know what? I just rewatched all the Lord of the Rings films, the director's cuts," and everyone in there was like swooning over their love of those movies, right? Mm-hmm. And then because I'm me, I have to go. Oh, you know, there's a new Lord of the Rings animated film coming out. And people were like, what? Like, excited. Like, there was, like, excitement when I said it. And then there was, like, is it connected to the films? And then I couldn't remember for a second. It's like, I think so, but then there's also the TV show. And they're like, so is the TV show not connected to the movies? Because clearly none of the people in the room had watched the TV show. And I was like, well, the rights are all mixed up. And, like, I slowly saw everyone's enthusiasm go and be like, all right, well, we're not going to see whatever this fucking animated Lord of the Rings thing is. Like, if it takes a fucking map to figure out what it even is in relation to Lord of the Rings, we're not seeing that shit.
No,
So,
I mean this wasn't the point. That's not why I was bringing this
mm,
point. But this is a good diversion because we're recording the week after Thanksgiving, and after dinner we're cleaning up, whatever. I'm talking to my godfather, and we talk pop culture stuff. Like he loves the Mission Impossible movies. He's with us on Dead Reckoning, by the way. He was like, "What was that?" He's like, these were so good. What did they do this time? There was no impossible mission at the end. And he was right, by the way. Like, he's right. there's no third act in that movie.
yeah.
But
History will agree with us on that one. I think that's one
yeah.
where it's like, if however the next one comes out, like the next one, if the next one's great, then people go, people are going to say like it fixed what went wrong with Dead Reckoning, and if it sucks, it's going to be like Dead Reckoning put it on this path. Like
Yeah,
it's
it'll be the No Time to Die, which generally speaking, everyone's like, oh yeah, Craig was maybe the best James Bond. Like
yeah,
people forget like that they didn't like Spectre out the gate, really.
yeah,
But anyways, and then so I'm bringing up other stuff because we're just talking about whatever, and he knows a little Spider-Man. We start talking about Spider-Man. I'm like, yeah, there's this new comic, and it's so good, and it's the first comic I'm picking up like on a monthly basis at this point in a decade. And then he's like, oh, so like what's going on with like the Spider-Man and stuff like in movies? And I start trying to break down the logistics of the movies, and he's like, okay, so he's like very clearly confused. And then he's like, all right, but like you picked up the comic. I'm like, yeah. And it's so great because it's a whole new like start. You could just jump onto it. He's like, oh, like what's the back? Like, he doesn't read comics, but he was
yeah.
curious. And he was like, oh, what's like the background? And to me, someone who's like totally fucking saturated with like the bullshit that comics and this nerd shit goes through, specifically superhero stuff. For me, I'm like, oh, it's obviously a great jumping on point. And then I'm explaining to him like, oh, he doesn't get bit by the spider until he's older. And he's like, oh, what happened? Like he was hooked by that. And then I'm like, well, it's because, and then I start explaining like, it's like a multiverse thing. I just see the enthusiasm waning. And he's like, I thought I was going to give him a fucking stroke by explaining all the crossover franchise bullshit it took to just basically say, no, he just got bit by the spider when he was older. Like, that's not enough
Yeah.
for, like,
Everything's-
I mean, that
everything's-
is enough. I mean, the him being bitten by the spider when he's older, that should just be the pitch,
Yeah.
right? But these studios and these companies, they can't operate that way because they don't want to lose the thread to their main line of comics. But now their mainline comics are being outsold by the spin-off comics.
Mhm.
So it's like, at some point, just like let that shit exist on its own,
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
but
everything needs to
again,
be
that
a
was not the point of that diversion.
everything needs to be a multiverse now, so we can like cross over everything with everything. Everything's culture soup
Yeah.
now. So
Yeah. And my godfather's a man who has not seen any Marvel movie outside of like Guardians 3, and he just remembers it being too sad. So, like,
hey, I'm in agreement with that one.
yeah. But okay, so the fantasy stuff. There was this big trend. There were actually a couple trends on social media for like dark fantasy stuff. I don't know if you saw those, where they would be like, choose your own adventure TikToks. Like, oh, if you want to follow Journey C, like click this comment to go to that video and like do this and that. And there's like this, if you're on TikTok or like on Instagram, you'll know like the dark fantasy synth music that was really popular this year.
I have no idea about any of this. So
okay,
I'm actually delighted to hear it. Like it's not, for once, it's not me hearing about a TikTok trend and going, eh. Like
yeah.
This one I'm kind of like, oh, right on.
Yeah, and then there was even like, I mean, some of it started ended up being like AI produced, like medieval fantasy stuff.
Yeah,
which isn't like great. I'm not crazy about that, but in hindsight, I'm seeing some of the stuff, and I'm like, oh, that's that old Lord of the Rings concept art. Oh, there's a little Star Wars old concept unused art that made in there. There's stuff I noticed, like, oh, that's the poster of Dragonslayer. I didn't know that at the time, And then there was a really funny one where it was like, just the gnomes and the like mages were at war with one another.
Oh my
and I'm
goodness.
like, what gnomes and what mages? And people would just like cosplay in these videos like I am joining the side of the gnomes for this battle or whatever the
This
fuck.
is the only good thing I've ever heard coming out of TikTok. I love this. I
I have
love.
to send you like, I'll send you videos. I'll download some videos and send them to you because
And the
I think you'll
problem is
get a
I
kick out of
can't.
them.
I'm not like I can't give myself over to the TikTok algorithm because I hate it. So
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
I need someone to do a YouTube 5 hour edit of this stuff and just post it, and then I can watch all of it. That sounds fun. That sounds genuinely kind of fun. Um,
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is why this series is doing much better on YouTube than a lot of our other stuff
mhm.
has before. It's just a perfect coincidence of like dark fantasy trends on social media and these retrospectives. Like the Keep has over 1,000 views on YouTube.
That's ridiculous.
I did like just over 1,000, like 1,001
That's
at the
that
time I'm looking at it.
that
That's
shouldn't be
crazy.
that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, yeah. So clearly something's going on. So there's something in the air with dark fantasy, right?
Mhm.
But to your point, like Dragonslayer is almost kind of like a forgotten movie,
Yeah.
basically. Like there's people we follow on Letterboxd, there are mutuals, who have seen the movie and have rated it very highly, very recommended in
hmm
their opinions.
hmm
Um,
I'm one of them.
yeah, 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 5 stars from you.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that many people knew about this movie. Like when you were you were recommending we do it for the show. I was like, okay, like this could go either way for me because I don't know anything about this movie. I didn't know it was broadcast on the Disney
I
Channel, but was
think
edited to remove 2 scenes.
you're
I
not
can
gonna
guess which
believe
ones off
what
the back of.
scenes.
um.
There's one scene that I think is pretty obviously cut from or edited from the movie. Uh,
Mhm, mhm.
that it's shocking that it's in a PG movie, but yeah, I think a lot of people, if you know it, it's from the Disney Channel. So I guess some privilege is showing. You had to have had access to the Disney Channel back in the day in a cable package. Um,
Mhm.
so there's that angle to it. And then I think the only other angle really is that George R. R. Martin and Guillermo del Toro are big fans of the movie. Um, and have
That
talked.
makes so much fucking sense.
Yeah, Guillermo del Toro was talking about Dragon Slayer a lot in the build up to his Hobbit movie that never happened. So, uh, talking about he's like, we gotta beat the dragon from Dragon Slayer in our design of Smog. Um, but well,
Yeah,
maybe
that didn't happen. Although
maybe
I I think I brought it up before, but like the House of the Dragon, the old dragon in that show,
mhm,
like I think that's a similar like a toned down version of what he was gonna do.
mhm.
Because Smog is so old
Yeah,
that it would have just been like saggy scales and stuff, which is an
yeah.
awesome thing that show did. I really got to see the
Well, I
rest of
mean
that,
that's
but
that's also that's Dragon Slayer because the dragon in this is supposed to be like ancient. Uh,
yeah,
but
yeah,
we'll get more into it. But I think that's the only thing that's really giving this movie any sort of cultural staying power right now. We'll talk more about its influence on those two things in a moment. But I want I want I want Diego to say what he thought of Dragon Slayer.
right now.
Yes,
Are you sure?
yes.
All right. Um, I see exactly why this bombed. I think it's sort of a slog in terms of like narrative propulsion. The characters feel very thin. There's just there's just not a lot of like a sense of wonder in terms of how the characters move through the environments or the adventure. Everything's filmed kind of miserably. Like it does look like also like a predecessor to Game of Thrones more than Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Although there's definitely elements there. These are all features, not bugs. I thought this was a great movie.
All right, there we
Yeah,
go. I was
yeah.
waiting. So
I thought it was
I
great.
was about to be like, none of those are criticisms. So,
Yeah. No, this is great.
yeah.
I wasn't like whooping and hollering, but I was also like, God damn, this is exactly my
Mhm.
type of shit. This is why you do the failed fantasy blockbusters right
Mhm.
here.
This is, to me, probably the second best 80s fantasy film, in my opinion. Um, I think this is an unheralded classic of the fantasy genre, frankly.
Mm.
Um, my letterbox review that I told you not to read is it should be considered the Searchers of the fantasy genre, um,
Oh,
which
I don't know about that,
I
but
genuinely believe. I genuinely
okay.
believe. I think this is in terms of this is how you do a fantasy film. I think this is one of the best movies to point to, frankly. Uh, and I hold a lot of other fantasy films up to it in terms of comparison, um, especially when you can kind of tell that this is on the cheaper scale of a fantasy epic, even at 18 million in 1981.
Hmm.
You can kind of tell, but they spent their money in the right places, I would argue. This is one of those movies that would get dinged now for the lack of genuine crowd scenes.
Yeah. There's a couple. They get them in there, but
There's a couple.
there's yeah. Uh, I mean, it's a. I wouldn't ding it against this movie. I think it's a more of a problem now.
Mm,
I have a whole like thesis on why we're noticing it more too.
mm,
Basically, lack of communities in the real world, and we want to see it represented on film, and we're not seeing it, and the narratives that we're choosing for like specifically horror movies. I would say
mm.
it's kind of hard not to want to see them blow up at the end with like a big town or something at the end, you know,
Mm,
and whatever. That's a whole other conversation, but yeah, I think there's a reason we complain about that more now.
mm,
And this movie, it's like it's a quest movie. So
mm.
when they get to that castle,
It's
like
a
that's when you
quest.
get more of the crowd stuff.
Yeah, it's a quest movie with like three locations.
Yeah. Well, it's just like the first location is just the first half hour, kind of. It's a
Yeah.
lot of like a small castle village,
Mm,
forest, lake,
yes.
more forest. Like,
It's a lot like it's
also, these are positives. These are
yeah.
genuine positives.
There's two castles. One is barely a castle. There's a village. There's the woods, and then there's a mountain
Yeah.
for your locations.
Yeah.
So, uh, yeah, but I love this movie, and I've loved it ever since I was a kid. I caught it on. I must have caught it on the Disney Channel. Although talking about the censored scene, that's a scene that I very much remember seeing. So I don't know if I saw it for the first time on the Disney Channel or on a different channel, but I do
Hmm.
remember it being in regular rotation on the Disney Channel for a little bit. Um,
It's crazy.
and yeah, I mean that's this and like Dark Crystal and shit. Like
Yeah, but Dark Crystal doesn't have side boob. You know.
Yeah, but it's kind of like the Abyss having nudity, right? Where it's like
Oh yeah.
you kind of did James Cameron just like go to the MPAA and being like, I'm teaching people how to save a life through CPR, so let me show the nudity.
Yep. Probably.
That seems to be how that must have been how he got that through. This one it's so weird though, where it's like you get yeah, like it's straight up side boob, and they just like the MPAA was like, sure, PG, whatever.
Yeah. They used to have like good clean cocaine for executives back then, so you got away with a lot more.
Yeah, but not the MPAA has always been a bunch of snobs. Like,
I know. I'm just making a joke.
but yeah, it's
Yeah, the
strange to me.
MPAA are fucked. The
Mhm.
MPAA serve genuinely no purpose for
Yeah,
society.
no, yeah, they're a censorship organization that we just allow to exist.
Yeah.
It's, it's a problem that we should really think about sometime. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Terrifier 4 and 5. I need you guys to fucking just the Terrifier, the fucking what's his name, Art the Clown, to just kill the MPAA in those sequels.
That should be the opening of Terrifier 4.
Yeah, those are all unrated films. He should just go to Hollywood and kill the MPAA.
Yeah, just do anything, man. Like
Yeah.
whatever. Like fuck it.
Yeah.
Um,
But no, okay, Dragonslayer. I knew nothing about this movie other than we were going to talk about it. I didn't know who was in it. I didn't know it was directed by a man named Matthew Robbins, who only directed he directed like 2 movies.
yeah, he directed
That's
a
like
few and
it.
directed Corvette Summer, the Mark Hamill adventure comedy film. That's a bit of a stretch. That was released in the wake of Star Wars. He directed the Legend of Billie Jean. Anyone? With Helen Slater?
Yeah,
Anyone? These aren't bad movies, by the way, in my opinion. Batteries Not Included,
which I have not seen.
which is the little alien robots that help old people. Um, uh, a movie called Bingo, which I've never seen, which looks like which looks like Matthew Robinson throwing in the towel a little bit. A talking dog movie. Uh, but he did write Mimic, which we've talked about.
Yes, that was going to be my segue. It's like, but he did write a shit ton of movies. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mimic. I didn't know this. Crimson Peak, which
Yes.
is like I think it's top 3 Del Toro.
Yeah,
Like I'll just say
you
that.
could make the
You
argument
could
that
make that.
it's his best movie. You
Yeah,
could make that argument with Del
yeah,
Toro. He also wrote his Pinocchio,
yeah. The
and
story, at least.
yeah, and he did write the unproduced At the Mountains of Madness. He was the screenwriter that Del Toro was working with when that didn't happen.
Oh, okay, that's the Universal script, right? That's the 3D one.
Well, it's weird. There's a script out there that Del Toro was like, that was not what we were going to shoot. Like that, and it's pretty bad. It's a pretty bad script, which is kind of shocking considering how good a team up they've been up till that point. Um, and so I don't know if there's like a better version that was just never released or is also floating out there. Um, we should also mention that he's worked a lot with Hal Barwood, the co-writer of this film. Um, I I believe they're both uncredited rewrites on Close Encounters and THX and Jaws. And even though it's not on their Wikipedias, I believe they also have uncredited rewrites on Star Wars. For some reason, the people who did uncredited rewrite work on Star Wars do not get the credit they deserve. I wonder why that is. Um,
Who's to say? Who's to
hey,
say?
who's to say? But yeah, um, and I every now and then him and Del Toro seem tight. So like they're always talking about projects, but who knows what's going to happen next? He's not writing the Frankenstein movie, is he? I don't think he is.
No,
Um,
no. I'm actually curious who is though. I trust Del Toro implicitly, so I'm
that
not
could
concerned.
just be Del Toro. Like it could just be Del
Yeah.
Toro's script.
So Del Toro is the sole writer on Frankenstein.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, yeah,
Seems to be the movie he's been thinking about like his whole life. So, uh,
yeah, yeah. I mean, fucking Pinocchio. The Pinocchio birth sequence in his is just straight up Frankenstein.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
There's
yeah,
so many things in his movies that are like. So it's going to be weird when he finally does it because it's so clear he took pieces from Frankenstein and put it in all his movies.
hmm
So we're probably on the verge of his Megalopolis. Take that for what you will.
All right. I think everyone should have their Megalopolis, and
I
that
do
doesn't even mean
too.
I love the movie. You know.
Same. No, that's it. I'm in total agreement on that. But yeah, Matthew Robbins. Oh, it looks like we keep bringing this up. Ray Gunn, the Brad Bird movie that may or may not get made. Uh,
Yeah. Not looking too good right now.
well, yeah, because
Sorry.
we talked about on our recent recording that he's doing Incredibles 3 actually. So that
Yeah.
sounds like Ray Gunn isn't happening.
Yeah. I was kind
Not
of
that it.
hoping. I mean, like, I bet it'll even be good. It's just like, God, I do want to see like another original from him,
Yeah, it's but
even
also
if
it's
I
that.
don't like it.
But then there's also the problem of John Lasseter being the president of Skydance Animation, which is where Ray Gunn was going to get
Ugh.
made. Um,
Oh fuck. Okay, yeah, that
yeah,
thing's dead. Never mind.
yeah, yeah. Who knows what's going on there?
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, and we got to shout out the origin of Matthew Robbins and us with the Happy Amblin. Robbins co-wrote Sugarland Express with Hal Barwood.
yes. So like, yeah, they were in like the
So,
Spielberg and Lucas orbit. They also
mm,
wrote the Bingo Long Traveling All Star and Motor Kings movie, which is like one of those movies that Spielberg almost directs before Jaws just takes his career in like a completely different direction. Like there's like these like four movies he almost does that you're like there's no way Spielberg would direct it, and it's like, well, if Jaws hadn't worked, he might have directed it. So, um, but yeah, it puts them in that the orbit of Spielberg and Lucas basically for the next couple decades, right? Um,
mm,
they do a lot of stuff together. Hal Barwood, in particular, again, basically does a lot of the same stuff Matthew Robbins does, but on the writing end. He directs one movie called Warning Sign, which is a science fiction horror film I have never seen. It doesn't seem to have good reviews, but every 80s horror film seems to get reclaimed, so there might be something there. I don't know. Have you ever seen Warning Sign?
no, I
Um,
haven't.
Let me see if anyone I follow has seen it. Um, no one. So like that's even more lost than Dragonslayer. Damn. Sorry, Hal Barwood. And that's basically the last. It's his directorial debut, and that's basically the last thing he does in film before jumping over to video games at LucasArts and making basically some of the first video games, which are adventure games. And he did Indiana Jones, um, and he did the game adaptation of Last Crusade, and then he did Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, which some people
Oh
consider,
shit.
yeah, some people consider one of the greatest, if not the greatest, adventure game ever made. Um, and I would argue if you're like, I don't know if I would be into adventure games, that's a pretty good one to test the waters with. I think it's a pretty accessible one, and very
Mm.
fun. Uh, if you're also looking for an Indiana Jones just adventure, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah. It
and
it does feel like video games are gonna be just like where you can just put Indiana Jones now. 'Cause,
yeah.
just not to derail the show, but like at the time of recording, the Bethesda or the Obsidian Indiana Jones game comes out in like 72 hours.
Oh, really? Shit, I didn't
I
know
I
that
had I
was.
had no idea.
It has a terrible title.
Yeah, no, they fucked up the recent titles on these things, but
And the
it's
Great
apparently very
Circle.
good, and people are very excited about it in the game
Yeah.
space. I'm not in the game space, is why I didn't know.
Well, it's the people who did the new Wolfenstein who are doing it, which is kind of like that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's some good fuck Nazi shit.
yeah, good timing.
Yeah,
But
yeah, very cathartic.
yeah, well, we'll see how that plays out. I'm kind of shocked there's not a ton of talk about it. But also I think we're just not in a great mood. So we'll see. I'm sure it'll be good. Um,
hmm
And I should also mention Hal Barwood. He also wrote Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, which is a more Tomb Raider like Indiana Jones video game, which isn't bad from what I remember. I remember playing it on the Nintendo 64 back in the day. Um, so I think he kind of was a weird steward of the Indiana Jones franchise in the video game world for a while before leaving LucasArts at a certain point. And he looks like he made a game called Matahari, an adventure game released in 2008, long after the adventure game genre had died. Um, and I've never heard of it. Um, Looks like people complained about it being short. which probably means it's one of the greatest video games of all time. So I'll have to check it out one of these days.
Wait, Matahari. That Matahari?
Yes, that Matahari. Um,
That's crazy. What the
it says
fuck?
the only thing for plot is one sentence. It says real life Matahari embarks on a fictional adventure in which she becomes a spy and uncovers sensitive military secrets, all in the midst of the outbreak of World War One.
You know what? George Lucas must have assembled all these World War One historian perverts because, like, there's Matahari stuff in the Young Indiana Jones adventures too.
Yeah.
There's an episode with her. She's the lead or the co-lead of it, and it's like,
Well, we have to remember about that generation is that that's the first generation with television, right? And
mm-hmm.
a lot of what is on television when they didn't have TV shows was old serials that a lot of
That's
them
yeah.
were, like there was old space opera stuff, but a lot of them were old adventure stuff, and a lot of it was influenced by World War One because a lot of that stuff is pre-World War Two, and then you get a lot of the post-World War Two cinema, which is basically like World War Two. That was a great war. We won. It takes until kind of Vietnam for people to get a little more reflective on World War Two. But yeah, so that's just that generation of guys, uh, and it's just interesting that they end up making like these major fantasy epics.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, congrats, Hal Barwood. That's honestly a pretty fucking wild run of video games.
No, it is. Al Barwood is super underrated, and also like there's a guy. Oh God, what's his name? There's a YouTuber. Let me look him up. I think he's called I Beat a Video Game or I Finished a Video Game. Um, Not the completionist, the guy who was for like charity fraud recently.
Oh, whoa! I had
Yeah,
no idea about
yeah,
that.
yeah. That was a story recently. Yes, I finished a. He's a British guy who does like 7 hour long videos on video game franchises. He just did one on all the X-Men video games, which was excellent, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Uh, but he also
What are they called again?
he,
I wanna follow them really
I
quickly.
finished a video game. Um,
Yeah, I'm gonna do this in the middle of an episode. Sorry,
no,
everyone.
that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, just making sure.
And he
Yeah,
did
yeah.
one. He did it looks like a 3.5 hour video on all the Indiana Jones video games. And he talks a lot about Hal Barwood in it. And he talks about Hal Barwood's follow up, which was Indiana Jones and his desktop adventures, which was basically meant to be a completely different game that then they forced him to put the Indiana Jones name on, which kind of fucked it. But in retrospective, it's a good game. It just maybe shouldn't be an Indiana Jones game. It's like a way ahead of its
Hmm.
time. Um, almost like a fucking Farmville type, not Farmville. Um, what's that game that people like that's about farming? That's not Farmville.
Animal Farm.
No, that's George
I
Orwell.
don't. No, Animal Crossing.
Animal Crossing, not that, but there's a different one.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Okay. Yeah. I was like,
Uh,
yeah. I didn't even recognize I said Animal Farm. I was like, no, I'm pretty sure that's the game.
yeah, like the Harvest Moon games, like a little bit
Okay.
like that in that area. It's a little like ahead of its time, but it got slapped with Indiana Jones, so it confused people in its era. Um, but yeah, he had a real interesting run. It's one of those like the video game industry is kind of depressing where you read about all these innovative people in the 90s who then like did their dream projects in the early 2000s and then like they all get fired. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's so many of that.
Yeah.
It's a shame. Uh
No, I mean we brought it before. The video game industry is speedrunning the collapse of the film
yeah,
industry.
yeah.
It took the film industry 100 years. The video games it took 20.
It's almost like there's a correlation going on.
No. Everything. There's no connection between anything. If you look too closely, you're not going to find anything.
Yeah.
Don't look too closely at
It's
anything.
just coincidental that the video game industry, the movie industry, the television industry,
The
the
music
music
industry, the
industry,
book
the book
industry.
industry, fucking puppetry probably. Like it's just a coincidence that they're all on the verge of collapse. It has nothing to do with the state of capitalism in the world right now.
No, don't, no, because if it's one thing is wrong in the space, and there's a correlation, that means our entire way of living is wrong, and that's just not true because we've done it
We
already.
gotta keep
That can't be the case.
we
There's no
gotta
way.
keep giving virgins to these dragons. See what I
There you go. That's a good
see what I
segue. Yeah.
did? See what I did? Tied
Yeah.
the
No,
dragon.
it's cool. It's not all our community's children.
Yeah, it's just one. What, you think that's
just one every once in a while.
Yeah. I mean, look, the needs of the many.
Is that so wrong?
Is that look? We all got to look, and it's a lottery system. It's very democratic and even. We're all equals. It's just just happens to apply only to women and virgins.
Yeah,
And
and also not really all of them. Not that it's a big deal.
No, it's all of them. It's all of them. Trust me. Trust me. I did it myself. I did it. I did it myself. I made sure it was every one of them. Got everyone's name.
We
in there.
had the war criminals investigate themselves, and they found nothing wrong.
Nothing. There's nothing wrong with the lottery system.
Yeah, I can't imagine why you and I responded to Dragonslayer so strongly. You more so, I think, but I did really like this movie, and I'm really glad I watched it.
It's one of those things where I go like, well, what are like the good fantasy films that aren't animated, aren't like goofy comedies made for small baby children, and aren't like post Game of Thrones deconstructions, right? Like what fits in there, And it's like Dragon Slayer. Like it's Dragon Slayer and like kind of Conan the Barbarian,
is that your favorite fantasy of the 80s?
That might be. It's debatable. It's one of those things where like I also have to consider it because Conan the Barbarian is like one of the most overtly reactionary films ever made. So like I might have to reconsider how highly I rank it versus a film that's like, hey, we should kill the dragon. Actually, that would be good. But yeah. So, but that's but another one where I'm like, when I watch Conan the Barbarian, in terms of story, I'm like, I don't think it's ever been done better in terms of fantasy storytelling, right? It's kind of like I rewatched Seven Samurai recently, and you watch that movie and you're like, how has anyone that's imitated this like just not done it as well? Like everyone's copied Seven Samurai and no one's done it as well. And I think I see echoes of what I like in Seven Samurai. I'm not saying that these movies are on that level, but in Dragon Slayer and in Conan the Barbarian, as respective to the fantasy genre, right? I think Wizard of Oz gets held up as like the fantasy film, right? Like Wizard of Oz is the one where people go like, yes, that's it, that's fantasy film. But I almost put that in a different category, which maybe isn't fair, but I think in terms of like when I think of fantasy, like a real fantasy story, I think of something like Dragonslayer.
I wonder if I would agree had I been introduced to it when you were.
Yeah.
Because like for me, it's one of those things where like it's just gonna be Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
like it's just gonna be that for the rest of my life.
Fellowship of the Ring is kind of become that, right? The first Lord of the Rings film specifically has taken that spot. But I feel like that almost comes slightly too late for me to want to give it that credit. Not that it isn't a masterpiece, right?
Yeah.
It's like there should be a movie closer to like 2001: A Space Odyssey is the definitive science fiction film, right? I'm not saying it's the greatest. I'm not saying it's the one that I'm not saying it's the best or whatever, but I'm saying that in terms of like if you go like what is science fiction, you go 2001.
It's that, yeah.
You go 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I don't feel like you can really do that with Wizard of Oz, frankly. And I feel like Fellowship of the Ring comes a little bit too late for me to want to do it. Like it's a little too postmodern and based on a book that is representative of that for the genre, like the book genre, right? Um,
Mm.
so like I'm like, where is the film where I'm like, in terms of cinematic language, do you point to and go like, that's how you do a fantasy film? And I think Dragonslayer and Conan the Barbarian are the two I point to when I think of that, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's in the way that I point to Good, the Bad, and the Ugly as like Western, right? It's that
Yeah.
has all the visual meat of a Western in it. Uh, and I just feel that way about Dragon Slayer and Conan the Barbarian. Uh,
Mm. I can't really disagree with that.
mm,
And again, this is coming from someone who just watched it
yeah,
for the first time.
I
You know.
I think the
Um.
problem is we have such a even though we live in this era where people are like, there's too much fantasy shit, like everything's escapism, whereas like real cinema, blah blah blah. I like it still feels like fantasy is a genre that's never gotten its due, in my opinion. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, Fellowship of the Ring, probably the best and closest, right? Uh,
Yeah, I mean the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. That feels like all right.
yeah,
It's here now.
mhm,
Like this is the peak of what we can do with that genre, and nothing really captures that ever again.
yeah,
Like I mean, Harry Potter is I mean it's pure fantasy, right? But it's also reality adjacent. It's not fantasy to the extent Dragon Slayer and Lord of the Rings are.
yeah,
It's still like, oh, we're just over here. That story's happening right next to us. You
yeah.
know, it's fucking. What is the
Yeah,
isekai? You
isekai. Yeah,
know,
yeah.
isekai. Excuse
I mean,
me.
yeah, Secret
It's
World.
fucking British
Like,
isekai.
yeah, Secret
Yeah.
World fantasy. Like, I mean, look, that's just existed
Hmm.
forever. It's just the anime genre. I got obsessed with it fairly recently. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
so
it's the same thing. It's different. It's different enough
yeah,
from
but
this fantasy that I don't think that's even as much as I love those movies, despite everything. Like, it doesn't feel right to say that that is even peak fantasy
so I'm
in a
on
way.
Letterboxd, and I just did I searched by genre. I did fantasy films, but I took out the animated films. I don't know if that's going to be a cheat, but I decided to take out the animated films.
No, no,
Uh,
I think that's fair because of our conversation, like the
yeah,
conversation we're having. I get what you're saying.
yeah.
Yeah,
All right. So take a guess what the highest ranked fantasy film on Letterboxd is, excluding animation.
is it a fucking superhero thing? 'Cause
No,
we've
it is
talked
not.
about
No,
how that's
no,
co-opted.
no, no. It's a movie we have discussed.
Okay, off the top of my head, it's not Lord of the
No,
Rings. It's not one of the
it
Lord of the
is
Rings.
Fellowship of the Ring.
Okay, yeah.
Now, take a guess what number two is. This you will not get. It is not a superhero film.
It's something recent, huh?
No, it was released in 2001.
And it's not
It
Fellowship.
is not Fellowship.
Oh my! Is it fucking the Sorcerer's Stone?
No, that's the fifth highest ranked one on Letterboxd.
Oh shit! I don't know what else, I don't remember what else came out in 2001.
Donnie Darko,
Oh my god!
which I mean, I guess is a
Yeah.
fantasy film. That's what we need. Letterboxd, you need a new genre, which is called fantasy, I guess, which is where you put all these other movies. God damn it! Like,
I. You know what? I mean, this is just how my brain works, I guess. I always considered it more science fiction or I guess science
same. I would
fantasy.
agree.
Just be like the number stuff in it. When there's numbers involved, I'm like, all right,
Yeah. Well, Richard
science.
Kelly grounds his stuff a little too much for me to consider it fantasy, even though he uses David Lynch as such a huge inspiration. I would argue Mulholland Drive is more of a fantasy film than Donnie Darko. So if you're going to put
Oh
Donnie
yeah,
Darko in
no,
fantasy,
easy.
why isn't Mulholland Drive?
Uh huh.
All right, number three is a Harry Potter film.
Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yes.
Yeah.
Number four is just wrong. It is not a fantasy film.
Okay. By the way, let me just say, I'm glad you're using Letterboxd, or we are using
Yeah,
Letterboxd as the barometer here, and not like IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes or
yeah.
something. I think this is better,
Yeah.
even though it has its own set of
Well,
hangups.
it's weird. We're like,
Um,
this is supposed to be the website for cinephiles, and this is what the cinephiles picked. So,
uh, can you give me a year?
2012, not a superhero film.
Yeah, yeah. Fuck, what else came out that year? Is it like it's like Brave or something?
No, it
What the
is.
fuck?
You'll never guess it because it isn't a fantasy film. It's the
Okay.
it's the Hunger Games.
Yeah, that's science
That's
fiction.
dystopian science fiction, you fucking dolts.
Yeah, that's not
Yeah.
fantasy.
And then I'm just gonna go through the rest.
Yeah, yeah,
Five,
yeah, yeah.
Philosopher's Stone. Six, The Lighthouse. Seven, Avatar, explicitly a science fiction
No,
film.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Eight, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.
Oh, okay. You know what? Sure. If
Yeah,
there's one, I guess,
yeah,
but still not crazy about it being in the top
yeah.
10.
Nine, Return of the King. 10, Two Towers.
Okay.
11 is Wonka.
A movie you and I both
Yeah,
like, but
but like
like,
also is like
what the fuck?
no. It's like a big
Yeah,
old
no.
no. All right. I wish Letterboxd would let me exclude decades the way it did genres because I was going to take out all the 2000s films and see what comes up. So
Hmm.
let me do this real quick, okay?
Yeah.
I'm gonna look at every decade going back to the 20s because once you get to the 10s, it's just George Méliès and stuff. So, all
Hmm.
right, what? All right, take a guess. Name a fantasy film you think would be in the top 10 fantasy films of the 90s, and then I will give you the top 10.
Fuck.
90s not a great decade for fantasy, I'll give you that. So,
Yeah, that's fucking hard.
mhm.
And it's gonna be like, what's the Page Master? I bet is up
Well, I
there.
took out animated, remember? I took out animated.
Right, right.
So,
Fuck. Oh, that's only half animated or whatever. See, that's where it gets wonky.
yeah.
There's gonna be some straight up non fantasy stuff, right? It's gonna be
Um,
science fiction.
I'm looking, it looks like they're all technically fantasy films this time. Uh,
Okay.
but
Uh, like City of Lost Children.
nope.
Ah, you
I
bastards.
don't even see the City of
Oh,
Lost Children anywhere. No, there it is. It is down like in the 30s of the
you're all a
90s.
disappointment.
It's just above the Mario Brothers movie. Um,
Whoa,
yeah,
whoa,
it's
guys, people, please.
it's between Small Soldiers and the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Okay, a small soldier's also not fantasy.
No,
That's science
no,
fiction.
it's not fantasy at all. Um,
What are you doing
yeah.
here?
All right.
Letterbox. I was just saying. I'm glad we're using this.
Here's all right.
And now I'm like angry.
Here's the top 10 from the 90s, and at least they are
Okay.
all fantasy films. But again, when I talk about how we visually imagine fantasy as a genre, I don't think any of them are representative of it. Number one,
Hmm.
Edward Scissorhands. Number two,
Okay.
yeah, 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 you know.
Sure.
Number two, The Green Mile. No,
Yeah. I mean.
number three, Groundhog Day. Number four, Matilda. That's Roald Dahl, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay. Okay.
number five, Being John Malkovich. Sure. Number six, The Mask. Number seven, Jumanji. Number eight, The Craft. Number nine, The Mummy. And number 10, Hocus Pocus.
Okay. Those are genuine fantasy
Those are at
films,
least fantasy
but
films.
yeah.
Those are at least.
Not
all technically fantasy films. Maybe The Mask is like the biggest if on there. And The Mummy, maybe you could say that's more a horror film, but that has a lot of like fantasy elements, right? They,
Yeah, there's like a swashbuckling adventure vibe to
yeah.
it. That fits, you know.
All right, fuck that. All right, let me see. I didn't do. Let me just do 2000s real quick. Um, all right, Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl is not in the top 10 for the 2000s for fantasy. Um,
That's a little wild to
Now,
me.
part of that is it looks like it's getting boxed out by all the Lord of the Rings films and the Harry Potter films. So that
Oh,
seems to
well.
be what knocked it out of there. But hey, but it's still not in the top 10. All right, let's move on to the 80s, the decade we are talking about.
Yes, before we get back to
All
Dragonslayer.
right, try to guess what fantasy film in the 80s is in the top 10.
Is it one we've talked about?
I'm not gonna. I don't want to give you that much of a hint.
Okay, so yes.
All right.
Okay.
Actually, you know what? I'm trying to count off the top of my head. Um, well, there's some choices here. I'll just say that. Um,
Okay. I do think the keep is that high now.
no, it is not. It's way higher than the
Okay.
keep should be, but it is not. The keep is way higher than it should be,
Okay.
but it's not.
Legend.
No.
Really? Okay, because both of those had a resurgence, and not just because we've talked about them. Like,
Legend.
they genuinely, yeah.
Here's something. Legend is higher than Conan the Barbarian, which is itself higher than Time Bandits, which I think is the 25th ranked on the list. So that tells you
Huh.
something. The top 10 are, and there's a couple here that are, again, just plain wrong. They are not fantasy films at all. Number one, Beetlejuice.
Oh,
No,
all right. Okay, yes. Fucking Tim Burton.
yeah, Burton kind of fucks it up a little bit. Number two,
Yeah,
E.T.
it's not wrong.
E.T., not a fantasy
No.
film. Not a
No.
fantasy film. He's from
No, it's
space.
not.
He's a little alien guy. Um, Number three, Princess Bride. Fine, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Number four, Ghostbusters. Yeah.
No.
I mean, look, there's
No, no,
ghosts.
I'm putting my foot down.
You know what?
No, it's
Yeah,
trying to be science
it
fiction
is
with
more.
the proton
It
packs and
is more
shit.
science fiction. I'll give you that. This one just plain wrong. Batman. Um,
Yeah, what the fuck?
Nothing happens in the first Batman that's supernatural.
No. Yeah, no, Jack Nicholson is real, despite what
Yes.
people would like to believe.
Number six, Gremlins. Yeah.
A stretch, but yeah, sure, whatever. What the fuck, whatever.
Number seven, Evil Dead 2.
Sure.
Number eight, Hellraiser.
Yeah, we're really fucking stretching that definition here.
Now, finally, a movie we talked about at number 9. Labyrinth.
Oh, right.
Labyrinth, baby.
Right.
And 10 is Wings of Desire.
Labyrinth.
Just edging out big. So.
Labyrinth. You know, I forgot we talked about it because I have it written down for the episode as Dark Crystal Labyrinth, and it's just,
so yeah.
I don't
Dark
know.
Crystal, higher than Legend. I'll give it that. So.
Right.
Both are. It is lower than Neverending Story, though. There's a lot of fantasy films you would expect to be higher, but just aren't. If I'm looking at the first page of Letterboxd, it doesn't look like Dragonslayer makes that first page at all for the 80s.
Wow.
I should. Nope, there it is, down in the corner, way down in the corner. Just below Godzilla vs. Biollante. Again, not a fantasy film. All right. I just want to do these decades because it's kind of fascinating. All right, take a guess what's in the 70s top 10. This one is that we start getting into, like, because it's the 70s, it's getting a little weird. So,
Close Encounters. I'm just gonna go to the shit that I know is not science fiction.
Think of a genuine fantasy film. You might be able to get this one. But there are also films that aren't fantasy at all.
Oh,
Actually, I guess they
Star
are.
Wars.
No, you know what? Someone was smart enough not to include Star Wars, even
Okay,
though
the you know what? No, I would say that's
even
fantasy.
though it
What the fuck,
is,
Letterbox?
but it's also
Yeah.
whatever. It's in space. Um,
I'm so angry right
all
now.
right, top 10 for the 70s. Number one, The Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Sure.
Number two, Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
I guess. Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
Number three, House. See,
Yes.
these are all film nerd favorites, right? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Number four, Willy Wonka
Great
and the
movie.
Chocolate Factory.
Oh my! How did I miss that one? Yeah. Okay.
Number five, Phantom of the Paradise. Uh, which does have a Faustian
Okay.
element to it. It's kind of barely there, but uh,
Yeah. That we're stretching it again.
uh, um, Valerie and her Week of Wonders.
I've not seen that one.
I like it. Letterbox doesn't seem to like it though, actually, but I like
Hmm.
that movie. Um, what's the Spirit of the Beehive? Another Criterion one. Uh, Donkey Skin. There we go. Um,
Mm.
this one, again, I mean, it's kinda uh, uh, a movie I love. Celine and Julie go boating, but is it what I think of when I think of fantasy? Not particularly. Um, and then number 10 is The Hourglass Sanatorium. These are all dreamlike movies. They're not really fantasy films, in my opinion. A lot of those are like what I'd call dreamlike movies.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, like Donkey Skin, like there's a straight up fairy godmother in that. So
yeah.
I'm gonna I'll give that one, you know.
Hmm.
Um yeah.
All right. 60s.
Fantasy never really got its due. I think
60s.
that's what we're
We
discovering
got to do
here.
60s.
All right, go, go, go.
All right. All right. Well, take one guess. It's might get it hard because, like, once you get to the 60s and 50s, you kind of like those decades kind of blend in like what movies came out when. I will say
Yeah, I'm all.
a childhood non-animated classic is number one in the 60s.
eh, oh, but did you take out the animation after that, or
See, I
is
said
it
it's not.
are you still
It's
counting it for this?
excluding animation.
Okay, okay, okay. I'm totally overthinking this now because my perception
Because
of
now
what this fucking website considers fantasy
I
is
would
so
consider
broken.
this a fantasy film.
Okay.
So it's not one that you're like, but
Uh,
think to your childhood. Although this might be one of those movies you confess you never watched as a child. All right, I'm just because
yeah, I got
you
nothing.
got to get it.
I got
It was
nothing.
released by the
Yeah.
Walt Disney Company.
Oh, is it Sleeping? No, no, that's 50s.
It's 50, not
And
remember,
also not
not
animation. Yeah, and I'm
animated.
so fucking see, it's my brain.
People are gonna hate you for not getting this one. I got to be honest.
Yeah, yeah.
It's Mary
All right, hang on, hang
Poppins.
on. No, 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 no,
Mary
no, 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 no,
Poppins.
no. Wait.
Mary Poppins. I already
Oh,
said it.
that's yeah. That's why. No, I didn't see that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
haven't seen
You
it.
confessed recently that you hadn't seen that. So um,
I've been very open about that. I'm waiting for it to play on the big screen, then I'll watch it.
that's a totally reasonable thing to wait for. Honestly, like at this point where it's like
Yeah,
you need to be locked into a dark room to experience that childlike magic. um,
yeah. Honestly, I'm kind of hoping the new Beverly or someone plays
well,
it.
I watched Mary
'Cause that feels like a
Poppins
place to go.
so often as a child, I broke the VHS tape. Um,
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
all right, and then in the top 10 for that, Mary Poppins number one, um, Quaiden number two, the Japanese film. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, there's a couple Japanese ones because the Letterbox loves Japanese cinema. The Exterminating Angel is number three. Uh, Barbarella, the Queen of Space.
Uh, you know what? I'm gonna give him that one.
VIY, the Japanese film. Um,
Oh, have not seen.
it's kind of been like it's popular now because I think because it's on the Criterion Channel. Um, another Japanese film is next. I'm gonna mispronounce this because I suck. Um, Kuroneko, um, from the director of
Oh, that's from the director of Onibaba,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Um,
See, that one I know. That's fucking crazy. I don't know. My brain's broken from
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang
American Fantasy.
is next. Uh, Fellini, Satyricon, Juliet of the Spirits, and then Jason the Argonauts just barely getting in there, which is kind of embarrassing. Jason and the Argonauts should kind of be way up there.
Yeah, see, that one feels like definitive fantasy to me.
Yeah, that's kind of one of them. All right, 50s.
All right.
You definitely love at least one of these movies, but they're all terrible
Okay.
representations of the fantasy genre.
Okay, you know what? Let me think. I'm gonna go. I don't know if it's number one.
Hmm.
Seventh Seal?
Yes, it's number one. You got it.
Oh shit! Okay, fine.
There you go.
Yeah, finally.
I mean, yes.
Okay, I got one.
That's a fantasy film.
Yeah. Again, I'm so just like angry about this now.
And then it's what's next? Ujetsu, the Japanese classic. Then we got Orpheus, Jean Cocteau's Orpheus. The Red Balloon. Harvey.
Oh, that's worthy. I think.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of these are technically worthy. Like Harvey is kind of like a really fun movie. Now, is it representative of fantasy? I don't know. We're getting into weird territory with it. Then we get some horror films. We got Night of the Demon, which is one of my favorites.
I do love that movie.
It's a great movie. Followed shortly by Bell, Book, and Candle. So Jimmy Stewart's got two in fantasy. That's interesting. The inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, the Kenneth Anger experimental film.
Yeah, I'll give him that one. Sure.
Nine is Powell and Pressburger's The Tales of Hoffman, which
I thought that was 40s for some reason. Okay,
a lot of their stuff
excellent.
is the 40s, and then the last one is Around the World in 80 Days, which isn't fantasy. So again,
you know what? That was in the back of my mind. That was one of my guesses for this decade, actually, because I was like, "Well, what are these fucking people gonna consider that?" And it's like, and I'm like, "Well, I guess like they're crossing over a lot with adventure."
Yeah.
I'd notice.
Yeah.
Adventure, or like you said, like the dream state stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the 40s. The number one there is just kind of one of the greatest films of all time. I think everyone's just kind of in agreement on it. And we all might be rewatching it soon.
Oh, It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'm coming back.
All right. Then there's Witches of the Afternoon. Is number 2. Which
that's another like
that's like
a daydream one.
Yeah, it's like a Donnie Darko situation again. Like it's just
yeah.
There's something kind of pathetic in my opinion about the number of movies that are ending up in fantasy, and none of them are David Lynch films, who I think is a lot closer to fantasy than the other genres he plays in. Right?
Yeah, a billion %. The fact that Donnie Darko is on there, you're right, and his stuff isn't. Like, it didn't even pop up in the 80s or 90s, right?
Yeah, nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
Didn't even. No, not even Eraserhead.
Like, no, his
Like,
yeah, Twin Peaks is a fantasy. Like, that's not real. Like, I mean, I don't mean that to degrade it or anything
I
like
once
that. Like,
said to my sister.
I obviously love that.
I once said to my sister, there's actually a lot of parallels between Twin Peaks and Kingdom Hearts, and she said you have to go to bed. All right, number 3 for the 40s.
Dale Cooper's like, Sora.
I'm telling you,
gives him a gun.
I'm telling you, it would work. If you did it, it would work.
Now, Sora, once a day, for no reason in particular, give yourself a gift.
Imagine you have to fight
Don't
the person behind the diner, one of the heartless bosses.
No, because then it gets fucking scary. That'd be fucked up. Like Bob, you have to fight Bob.
Yeah, it works. It's thematically, they're thematically similar.
Hey, Twin Peaks was on ABC.
Hey. All right, number 3. All right, I'll go through the rest of the 40s real quick. A Matter of Life and Death, one of my favorites. Beauty and the Beast. I Married a Witch. The Uninvited. The Ghost of Miss Murray. Thief of Baghdad. Heaven Can Wait. And Atland. Again, a lot of these are like dreamlike films. We need a new genre. We need a new genre like we need for superhero films. Because again, like Wizard of Oz, I would associate with dreamlike qualities, right?
Yeah.
All right, 30s. What movie did I literally just say?
Oh, yeah, Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz is number 1. The top 10 there are Wizard of Oz, King Kong, Vampire, the Carl Theodore Dreyer film.
Yeah,
another
that makes sense.
another dreamlike movie. So all right,
I think the vibes though. I'll just say that the vibes of that type of movie back then are. I can at least give that to fantasy.
Yeah, it gets a little different once you get there. Here's something that's dumb though. Number 7 is Dracula's Daughter, but Dracula isn't on the list. So Letterboxd, get your shit together. The Mummy, The Blood of a Poet. So Cocktoo's got a lot, so we got to give him a lot of credit, I guess. Werewolf of London, which is a movie that exists. The Lost Horizon, which I don't know if I would consider that a fantasy film. A Christmas Carol.
No, I wouldn't, for the record.
One of the earliest adaptations of A Christmas Carol. And A Midsummer Night's Dream. So the Ian Hunter starring Midsummer Night's Dream.
I've not seen that one.
They had a lot of fantasy films in the 80s. Obviously, it's a decade where we're still learning how to make movies.
30s, you mean?
Yeah, 30s, yes.
Yeah. Well, really quick, would you consider King Kong fantasy?
Well, look, that's where you start splitting off, where it's like technically fantasy, but that's much more an adventure film, right? Like that's
yep. Just like we were saying.
And monster film. Now, Lost World films as a genre technically fall under fantasy, but they don't really anymore. Like now they have to be science fiction because we've discovered too much of the world, right? Like in the 30s was like kind of the last decade you could kind of get away with. There's an island we haven't found yet, right? It's like the last moment.
Well, here's the thing. Obviously, this is just a straight up superhero film, but I think its interests are much more in the pulp adventure vibe. James Wan's Aquaman, I think, like he's going to the center of the earth and shit like that, and there's like fucking dinosaurs and stuff. Like I think that's very much like, oh, let me try some Jules Verne type shit.
That is James Wan being like, they're never going to let me do a fantasy film unless it's superhero themed. So yeah, and frankly, that's why it's one of the better superhero movies. So, all right, we're not even going to do the 20s because it's a lot of like bullshit. Just
because they don't talk.
Well, no, it's just like the first one is Unseen Andalou, the fucking Louis Buñuel film.
Banger, by the way. I saw it on the wall of a museum, and I was like, yeah, this is the way to watch that shit. I'm not even joking.
These are all great movies, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, but are they fantasy films, right? Like, And so again, that's why I posit Dragonslayer as a great film because there aren't movies like it, frankly. Um,
Yes, let's go back to that. But I want to say, I think part of the reason I really love the work of my boy F.W. Murnau
mhm.
is that I think silent films are a great gateway to fantasy
No,
back
I would
then. And they
agree.
must have gone fucking crazy. And, like, because there's a storybook quality to them. Like, Nosferatu isn't just, like, really fucking scary if you watch that as a kid,
Yeah,
right? Like, the imagery is enough to, like, fucking stick with you forever. There's a reason people have been remaking it for 100
yeah, I would
years,
agree.
you
Um,
know?
but also
And so I think stuff like that
think
is
about it
there's an easier gateway to fantasy.
though, like early cinema, um, it's almost all fantasy films, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like with George Méliès, like that's the dominant genre, and those I can definitely see fitting more into straight up fantasy, right? Like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
what he was doing, but it does oddly kind of fade the further you get into. Although the 1910s are more dominated by more what you would call realist films of their era. And then the 20s, you get, you know, Nosferatu. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, I feel like, could have made the fantasy thing, but it wasn't there.
Yeah,
So,
what the fuck?
yeah. I mean, I like,
I'm finally on the pages now, and I'm seeing like Faust is on there,
yeah, like,
but Nosferatu isn't.
yeah, it's very arbitrary. So I don't know. Haxan wasn't, and that feels like very explicit in their fantasy elements. But
Yeah.
whatever. Um,
You know what? Here, we'll go back to Dragonslayer right now, but like even like Sunrise, Song of Two Humans isn't on there for
mm,
the 20s, and that I think is much more dreamlike fantasy,
mhm,
but I've seen less like qualifiers make it into the other decades,
yeah.
so who the fuck knows?
Mm. But
Whatever.
but yeah, but this is just
Strange,
showing you that
strange.
like fantasy in an odd way still feels adrift, even when we're doing postmodern stuff like, Game of Thrones that are like deconstructions of the fantasy genre, right?
Uh-huh.
But we still don't like it. It feels like we don't have that fantasy movie to really point to other than Fellowship. Like Fellowship is the argument that it does exist, right? And it feels like because
Yeah.
that movie is beloved by basically everyone, that it's like, okay, yes, that's got dwarves in it, that's got elves, that's got all this stuff in it. Doesn't have dragons in the first one anyway, uh, but it's
And technically no dragons in that trilogy.
yeah. I mean, there's the
If you want to get
yeah, if you get
pedantic.
pedantic about it, but like, what does the general public know, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's they don't need to know. They don't need to know the difference between goblins, orcs, and all that shit. Like,
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, it's so it's interesting. It's again though, but I guess the counter to what I am talking about is that fantasy is much more defined by animation, right? That it's when we think about fantasy, we think of animation. In terms of that ranking, the first one is Spirited Away, which is kind of like yes, that is Alice in Wonderland, right? Like that is just one of the classic. It's a lot of Miyazaki in the top 10. Ratatouille is too, so there's also flaws there.
Um,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, no. Incredible
The
movie. No.
Super Mario Brothers movie has made the top 10, I should point out.
The animated one?
Yes. Uh,
That's a shame.
yeah. Um, yeah, not great. Princess Mononoke, not in the top 10. Um,
That's fucking crazy.
yeah.
That is maybe the single craziest thing
I mean,
you have said.
Howl's Moving Castle is four. There are three Miyazaki films. No, I think there are four Miyazaki films in the top 10, which are in order Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, My Neighbor Totoro, and The Boy and the Heron.
Two of those are not better than Princess Mononoke, but we don't have time to get into that.
I would probably agree on at least one of them, even though I do love Howl's Moving Castle. Um,
Yeah, I do. I love all of those.
yeah,
I just No, but
Miyazaki,
again,
yeah,
we're here to talk
Miyazaki
about
just
Dragon
doesn't.
Slayer.
Miyazaki just doesn't make a bad movie, is the thing. Like that's.
Yeah.
But again, so yeah, it's like it's more defined by animation. And when I start going through the decades with animation, well, all right, fuck this. All right, so 90s animation, the number one is Nightmare Before Christmas, which, like,
No.
technically, yeah, but fuck off. And
No, stop motion claymation is animation.
no, I agree with
It
that.
is.
In terms of fantasy, is my hang up.
You, okay. Here's a thing. Here's a thing that I've been thinking about since you brought up these conversations in this episode. Horror can be fantasy. So Halloween, there's a maybe a crossover there, but you think Halloween, that's horror. That is specifically horror.
Yes.
You can debate the crossover with fantasy. Christmas as a holiday is pure
I
fantasy.
guess, but
I
don't-
know the magic of Christmas. I just rewatched National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, an excellent movie, obviously, right? That movie's finale is like this fucking nonstop mechanism of setup and payoff until it just explodes and everything is completely logical. You see it set up throughout the entire film, building upon itself. But that ending is representative of why people love the holidays. The ones who do.
Fine, whatever.
The magic of Christmas.
But these are the films that
Yes.
Night Before Christmas is ahead of. Princess Mononoke, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Hercules, Space Jam, fuck that. Anastasia, fuck that.
No.
Stuart Little,
It's,
fuck that.
No.
James and the Giant Peach.
It's...
But...
No, here's the thing. It shouldn't be number one. Nightmare Before Christmas is a Christmas movie. It is not a Halloween movie. It is a Christmas movie. It's about Christmas. It's about the people understanding and learning about Christmas.
I'm fine. Look, I'm giving it a pass. I'm just saying, in terms of what it's ahead of.
Yeah, no, I'm in complete agreement with that. I'm just saying that is a fantasy film.
Because
it's about Christmas.
I conceded. I was just saying that I can't. It's ridiculous that it's ahead of Princess Mononoke, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast in terms of fantasy.
No, yeah, everyone's wrong. Yeah, everyone's wrong about that.
All right, 80s. Oh man, Miyazaki just fucking runs the gambit here. It's My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, The Little Mermaid, Castle in the Sky, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Like that's the top 5. So
you know what? I didn't think Nausicaa was going to be up there. Even though it might be coming up as one of my favorite Miyazaki's as I get older.
But also technically a dystopian film.
It's so underviewed.
But technically a dystopian film.
Yeah. You know what? It's more sci-fi. For sure. Yeah.
All right, 70s. Belladonna of Sadness. All right, whatever. The Rescuers, that's not even fantasy. I guess the mice talk, but fuck off with that.
Yeah, no, that's an adventure film.
I'll give it this. Look, the 70s kind of dire in terms of animation. Like, just not a great decade for animation. We got some Rankin Bass films in the top 10. So that's not a great sign. 60s, it's Sword in the Stone, Yellow Submarine. What the fuck? I mean, yeah. The Fabulous Baron Munchausen. The Snails, that short film that got popular. I'm so annoyed. I'm just annoyed with this now. Sorry. 50s. All right, 50s. Finally, we kind of get a good run here. But it's all Disney. So it's Alice in Wonderland, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Peter Pan, and then the Snow Queen, the one non-Disney film, animated film. So 50s kind of and then 40s we got Fantasia, Pinocchio, Ichabod, Mr. Toad, The Reluctant Dragon, and Superman. God damn it. And then 30s, it's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but we weren't doing animated.
Wait, which Superman was it?
I believe the first one of the Fleischer ones, the Mad Scientist. So
okay, that's the one with the big gun, right?
Yeah,
that he turns
literally called the Mad Scientist, and it's in the fantasy genre.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Because I was gonna be like, well, mechanical monsters, like you could. I mean, they're robots, but
yeah,
like you could make an
you
argument
could,
there. Or
but fuck off.
yeah.
So yeah, that's why I love Dragon Slayer so much because this is what it's going up against. This is what I've been fighting my whole goddamn life. Uh, that I just in my bones I just feel that fantasy as a genre is underserved, even though we've been talking about some absolute bangers for this retrospective. But part of why I think we can do this retrospective is that once we finish it, we're out of fantasy films to mostly talk about.
Hmm.
There will be,
Yeah. This is a 1 season deal.
yeah, there are obviously, I'm sure there will be others that fall under the fantasy genre. Did Lady Hawk make money? I like the movie Lady Hawk. Uh,
I think it did.
but I think that made money. So, um, no, Lady Hawk technically a bomb, 18 against a $20 million budget. Um,
Oh,
but
yep. Nope. That is a bum. Okay. Okay.
but yeah, like I'm sure there's technically other fantasy films, but like we're basically done with the fantasy genre after this retrospective. And look at it, a lot of them bombed. So we're still there's something up in an era where Dungeons and Dragons is so popular and basically mainstream, in an era where fantasy video games like Skyrim get re-released constantly, in an era where the number one show on TV for a while was fucking Game of Thrones, right? Like
Mm.
it just feels weird that cinema specifically feels underserved in terms of the classic fantasy film. Um, but again, I could be cheating there with where I discount all these dreamlike fantasy films because if we include those, then
No,
yes.
no, you're not. You're not
But
cheating.
if
I just
if
no. You're
if
correct.
we include those though, then the genre is overserved, right? Because that is the majority of fantasy films, right? That's a lot of great movies. That's A Christmas
Yeah.
Carol. That's
Meshes
it's
of the Afternoon. Great movie. Great short. It's not. It's not fantasy.
mhm,
I'm sorry. It's just not.
yeah.
It's that's like an experimental film.
Mm.
It's not even technically surreal. If you want to get
And
into like
again,
specific definitions of stuff.
it's like in terms of cinematic language, Star Wars is one of the higher ranked ones. I'd maybe say
Yeah.
Empire Strikes Back leans into the fantasy a little more. Um, but it
Well, yeah. Luke cuts off his own head in the forest.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yes.
yeah. Well, yeah, there's literally like a forest you go and train with an old master and shit like that. They get the war out of the way fairly quickly in Empire Strikes Back. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, uh, but I think that's a frankly sad statement for someone who maybe just wants to see people fight a dragon once in a while in a fucking movie. Like, that's just what I
Hmm.
want to see sometimes. Um, but have I won you over?
Yes, you have. I don't even think I was against it. To be honest with
Well,
you, I think it
I,
just.
I came in hard saying it was the Searchers of fantasy. So,
Yeah, you know what? Yes. Um, in that case, yes. I think the difference is go watch Dragonslayer. By the way, everyone.
yes.
The difference is that the Searchers it kind of puts a cap on the Western narrative, the myth of the Western in America, right? Because the
Yes.
Western is like the American myth,
Hmm.
the frontier, the Wild West. That is a specifically American myth, and I think Dragon Slayer it keeps the door open for fantasy.
I disagree.
You do okay.
I think there's as much closing the door here as in the Searchers because a lot of it is about how nakedly corrupt the church and the state are. That
Well, yes, but I
but
guess. Oh, here you go.
in
You do your thing
in
first.
the classical conception of a fantasy story, usually you defer to either the church or the state as being the actual source of power, right? As being that's what
Hmm.
can defeat the dragon in a lot of ways. Now, sometimes it doesn't have to take on the the absoluteness of that authority, but it can be like good morals, right? Like the kid with good morals is the one that bests the monster at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And here it's like, no, even our lead is like a liar, right? And at the end of the story, it's like,
Yeah.
no, you aren't really a wizard, you know? Like you have strength, but you're not that. And it's about fantasy leaving the world, which a lot of fantasy stories are about the end of fantasy in the world. Like that's just kind of a genre staple. But it is something where, I mean, look, Saint George and the Dragon, which movie is very clearly riffing on. For those who don't know the story of Saint George and the Dragon, there was a town of pagans where the king used the lottery system to sacrifice virgins to the dragon regularly until his daughter's name came up. He offered gold to anyone who would fight the dragon, but no one would until St. George showed up and using the power of Christ he doesn't kill the dragon, but he like basically puts a leash on the dragon and makes the dragon like serve him and the princess. And then he's like, "I'll kill the dragon if you convert to Christianity." Right? And so all these pagans convert to Christianity because he has proven using the power of Christ you can tame the dragon. And that is an image used throughout history in the church is, the church militant stamping on a lizard. It's all over the place in militant Christian imagery. And then this is a story where the church is a fraud and the king is a fraud. And the real dragon that gets slayed by the protagonist is a man. So
Mhm.
that to me is, in a way, it's closing, but the problem is, which I will concede to you, but I think it's more of just problem with the genre itself, is that by the time The Searchers has come out, it's being made by John Ford, who himself has done about a dozen westerns before The Searchers, correct? So he's
Yeah.
almost closing the door on his own career. Uh, so fantasy as a genre had not been formed enough for Dragonslayer to fully do that. I will concede to that, right?
Mhm.
But when you think about westerns, think about it. It's had time to we go through Stagecoach to fucking Red River to fucking The Searchers to fucking Once Upon a Time in the West to fucking Blazing Saddles to fucking trying to think of what I mean. I guess Silverado would be the '80s one, which is kind of a like reconstruction, which makes sense for the '80s.
Mhm.
To Unforgiven, to the assassination of Jesse James, to something like Django Unchained, right? Or Rango, which
Mhm.
are like these like constructions and deconstructions and reconstructions and satires. Like it's done every element of it, and fantasy has not grown as a genre enough to be able to do that, arguably.
Yeah. And I guess that's my argument here.
Mm.
Because I was not aware of like the critical eye that Dragon Slayer had. I thought it was gonna be like fucking Beastmaster. You know what I mean?
Another
Like,
movie I love, by the way. I love Beastmaster.
okay, I do like that movie.
Mm.
It's just very obviously of its
It was
era
made for
in a way.
$5.
Yeah, yeah. And I discovered it through a fucking joke on Community.
Mm.
Chevy Chase dresses up as like the Beastmaster
Oh,
because it's such a popular movie, and it's not. Like, that's a
I
joke.
forgot that happened in Community. Uh,
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah. Fucking Chevy Chase, dude. What a fucking waste of resurgence. But god damn it, we all loved you, man. Don't be an
yeah.
asshole. Anyways, but so when it has like that critical eye about like the institutions and royalty, and just like the fantasy elements in general, like I was really impressed by that. But I do still think that because it's such an early fantasy film, like a pure fantasy film, because it's not deconstructing that, it is just critical of it,
Mm.
in my
Yeah,
opinion.
there's
Um,
not a mold to deconstruct in cinema, but you could
yeah.
argue a lot of what I've complained about lacking in cinema is totally present in literature, though, right? Like fantasy
Hmm.
literature has a very strong backbone and has been doing everything I've complained about cinema not doing for fantasy for decades at this point.
Yeah, but I think you're totally justified, and I would even agree with that. Like, we should be having like original fantasy films for the cinema. Like, in a perfect world, we get Lord of the Rings on screen, not just
Yeah.
in the pages to adapt
Yeah,
on
not
screen.
an adaptation.
I mean, how often do you hear people talk about, like, you know, if you're gonna, I mean, I've heard this fucking, like, for as long as I've been trying to write shit, like, you know, oh, you want to do like this genre, you want to try that thing, you got to do it as a book first and then sell it, and then you could try to make it. And it's just like, that's crazy. Imagine you told someone to do the food metaphor, you got to make a snack first, and then maybe you could make yourself dinner.
You gotta have the
You would
candy
kill the
bar
person
first.
that told you that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You would kill the person who told you that, rightfully so.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I just, I think it leaves the door open with its own existence for more fantasy stories that, again, aren't deconstructions necessarily, but show that you can take like a fantasy framework and still have a critical eye and still, you know, embrace fantasy elements. Although it's worth noting that the very minimal research I did on this movie, because I mostly just wanted to give my reaction to the movie, is that they did set out to make a more like quote unquote grounded fantasy film with this. Like, as much as we're hyping it up as like, oh, this is like pure fantasy storytelling, and it is. Just that, like, they did try to like ground it in like a tangible reality in a way that the original Star Wars did with its like its ramshackle like science fiction stuff.
I think this is where we can get into talking about how this is labeled as a dark fantasy film. And I maybe have some disagreements with that labeling. But it could just be, again, the benefit of being born after the 80s, right? Where, and this might be where my whole rant I'm doing falls apart, because fantasy up until this point kind of was the territory of Disney films, right? Um, when I'll say this, when Del Toro was talking about this movie as having one of his favorite dragons in it, he said his other favorite dragon was Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty, the animated film, which is also kind of just a like stripped down, this is how you do a fantasy story type film, right? I think we're both big fans of Sleeping Beauty, the animated film.
Fuck yeah.
But it's also like very plot light, you know? And if that's the type of fantasy you've been growing up with on the screen, which is the majority of it, that is actually fantasy, while also reading a lot of fantasy literature, I guess it would lead to something like Darkslayer, and I guess it would technically make Dragonslayer, and I guess it would technically make it dark fantasy, but I don't know if I would call this movie dark fantasy. But I think that could just be the sliding scale of what fantasy is in the modern eye. Like, maybe if I saw this in the 80s, it would have been dark fantasy, you know? But I'm not totally sure if I would categorize this as that.
I think I would now. It's interesting that you think you wouldn't categorize it because you grew up after the fact, right? And we grew up after the 80s. I think I classify it as dark fantasy specifically because of that. And again, this is taking in animation fantasy as well. I think it's just the material. Like, it's so like cynical about like the institutions of like things that are often in fantasy, like structures in need of defense or something like that, right? Like Lord of the Rings, for example. Or just like the fucking viciousness of the sacrifices, you know? I think it's just, it's a little heavy. I don't know if I'd show this to like a 6-year-old.
It is a PG rated film.
It is, but remember, 80s PG until a while was a little different, you know?
I think in this age, I think now when I think of dark fantasy, I think of Berserk, the manga. I think of Dark Souls. I think of a lot of the FromSoft games, right? Uh, I think of the Sandman comic. Like it's a little urban, but that's very dark fantasy, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm trying to separate like Conan the Barbarian the movie is another one that gets labeled dark fantasy, but I think that's so much more sword and sorcery, right? Which is its own
Yeah.
thing. Um,
Yeah. That's not necessarily fantasy in
yeah.
my eyes. I think there's crossover if you're talking to like a normal human being who isn't like brain dead from the
Yeah.
internet. Like, yeah, there's crossover. You just say like, yeah, it's a fantasy film. But
The other
since we're getting in the nitty
the
gritty,
other would be
you
my
know,
boy Elric who keeps coming up, who arguably one of the defining dark fantasy characters. Um, and yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I see this as much more pure fantasy than dark fantasy. But that could just be where my brain is at, having absorbed too much fantasy stuff in my life, right? Uh,
hmm
it 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 could just be that, and like I think Berserk kind of like ends up setting the tone in my brain of what I consider dark fantasy. Where like that is fucking dark, and all the monsters you fight are like H.R. Giger nightmares. Like, and
I gotta fucking
you
read this
should read
shit.
Berserk, but it's also like the darkest shit ever. So yeah, read Berserk, everyone. And what was I about to say? I should say that when in the design of the dragon for Dragonslayer, they very specifically wanted to avoid a sort of xenomorph alien look to it. They were afraid it might look like that, and they tried to avoid that with the design of Amerithrax Pejorative, which is
What a fucking
one
name.
of the great dragon names of all time.
Yeah, no, sincerely, yeah, this is fucking. It's a mouthful. Doesn't roll off the
No,
tongue, but
but
goddamn, it's a
yeah,
name.
it's like you like I don't want to fuck with that.
Yeah.
Uh, but I guess that's just where my brain is at when it comes to the fantasy genre. Um,
All
but
right. I
I see
mean,
where you're coming from though. Because like I guess Lord of the Rings would be much more straightforward fantasy, right? Um, like
yeah,
you
and
wouldn't call that dark fantasy.
no,
But then how far removed from the tone of Fellowship of the Ring is Dragonslayer?
I think it's a county over.
All right, all right.
Like I truly, I do, I think that. Yeah, I think Lord of the Rings. I mean, was such a hit. It was also like more accessible tonally,
Mhm.
where you do start off with like an adventure that isn't necessarily cynical from the protagonist's point of view, the hobbits, right? Like they're kind of the perfect gateway character. Like Tolkien and Jackson's interpretation, they're kind of the perfect gateway to that narrative, which ultimately does get much darker. And Dragon Slayer, I think, is just out the gate like, no, the guy doesn't want to talk to you.
Mhm.
And he's like, "Oh no, I'll talk to them. You gotta see me die."
Yeah, you
And it's
gotta
like, "Whoa,
yeah.
whoa," you know,
Stab me, it'll
like,
be fine.
um,
Oh.
yeah, and then he did. There's not immediately.
Yeah.
Um, so there's and then like just like the visual and aesthetics of that like the early sequel, which is like just out the gate. It's like nah, this is
All
pretty.
right. Hey,
It's pretty near
all right.
somber, I guess.
There's another film that same year, Excalibur. Now
That was the same year. Oh
now
shit.
I think that is a lot closer to dark fantasy.
Yeah, I would agree.
So
I would
just
agree
gonna
with
throw
that.
that out there. Uh,
Okay, here you go. Lord of the Rings, not dark fantasy. Dragon Slayer, arguably dark fantasy. Excalibur, dark
all right.
fantasy.
So Dragon Slayer somewhere in
Is
the
that
middle. So
yeah,
we'll
yeah.
do
To
that.
me, I would lean more dark fantasy, but I'm
Hmm.
not really gonna fight
I'm
like
just
it being not.
because part of this conversation is because this is someone who's been a fantasy nerd his whole life. Like it's something where I start getting frustrated in the lack of like I guess this is what we're thinking. It's weird to be a fantasy fan and a cinema fan at the same time. Like,
Hmm.
because you feel like movies haven't gotten there, right? Like, in my opinion, like you're
Hmm.
like the genre feels like it's really lacking on the big screen. And then when I watch a movie like Seven Samurai, like The Searchers, I find those movies closer to what I want to see in a fantasy film than actual fantasy films. So, I mean, look, Once Upon a Time in the West, like that's kind of, like a mythical scale Western, right? It's
Hmm.
it's pure. It's so spaghetti westerns a lot of the time are almost just fantasy versions of westerns, you know. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're the American myth, and I mean, the crossover with Dragonslayer, with ILM and LucasArts and Lucasfilm, right? No Lucasfilm really is involved with Dragonslayer, just like people that worked in it. There's a lot of crossover there. Like Ian McDermott's in
yes,
this,
in
and
a great
you know,
small performance. Um, he
yeah, yeah.
he gets
And then
burninated to death.
yeah, good burninated. Yes, of course. Oh my God, do we do Homestar
There's
Runner?
another great dragon named Trogdor, the Burninator.
Now Trogdor, that's a name I have not heard in a long
God, we are
time.
so old.
I know.
Remember when that was the
It's
funniest
depressing.
thing ever?
Yeah, I never got a Trogdor shirt, and I think it's past time. I don't think you can get that anymore.
Well, there's a very
Rather, I don't think you should wear that in public
no
anymore.
fuck it. That it's like retro now. Like
Is it okay?
now it's
Whatever.
like like Gen Z won't know what you're referencing, but people our age will. So
No. You know what? I'll get one before next Comic Con. I'll be a
I'm
hit.
looking on the Homestar Runner page, and it looks like they do sell Trogdor t-shirts, but they're also like so deep it's like weird riffs on Trogdor. So
Oh, okay. It can't just be Trogdor, like just the
I'm
image of
sure there
Trogdor. Is
is if
that
I
too much
go
to
deep
ask?
enough. There's
Okay, I'll look it
a
up
black
later.
shirt that's just Trogdor the Burninator, just a little drawing of him.
Okay.
So look, Verifax Pejorative does burninate the countryside and burninate the peasants.
He's burninating all the people in the Thafter's cottages.
Trogdor was a man. He was a dragon man. Sorry. Now that's in my
No, it's
now
fine. It's
it's in
fine.
my brain.
Um,
Uh,
Here, but on the topic of like ILM and Star Wars and stuff and westerns and the Searchers, everyone always wants the Searcher shot for their protagonist,
yeah.
right? Could be like, oh, that's like powerful shit. It did just click in my brain because I'm so Star Wars brained that Luke saying it's time for the Jedi to end in the Last Jedi. That's the Searcher shot.
Yes.
It just it did not. That's the first time I'm recognizing that. That movie's so fucking good. I'm still finding shit to love and appreciate in it. That's all I'll say about that. It's
Well,
just
I
wow.
think it's indicative maybe of
What a
why
movie.
fantasy hasn't taken off on the big screen because fantasy nerds are so fucking pedantic about fucking the mythology and the lore that they don't realize when cinematic language is being deployed. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah. And I like the movie, and I didn't catch that until right now.
just throwing all that out there. Well,
Wow.
it's one of those things where I always said like if you're a fan of Star Wars, like fans of Star Wars struggled with Last Jedi, fans of movies loved it, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's really what it came down to. And
Mm-hmm.
so you got you learn who you are watching that fucking movie. Um
Truthfully, which is why it's a great work of art. Even if you just don't like it, I think that proves that it's gonna
just admit
be a great
just
work of art.
admit
But
the
yeah, that's
reason
that.
you don't like it is because you don't like how Luke Skywalker was portrayed. I'm totally fine if that's your
Yeah.
argument because it's not one I have to agree with. It's your
Mm-hmm.
taste. I'll let you have it. Um,
Speaking of actors, though,
oh wait, before we get
Mark Hamill isn't in this
Mark Hamill is
movie.
not in this movie. You feel like he would be, but let's talk a little bit
Yeah.
about dragon slaying myths in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the oldest type of stories humanity seems to tell. It goes all
Yes.
the way back to classic mythology. It stretches across cultural borders. You can find dragon myths in Japanese mythology as they are happening simultaneously in Greek mythology as they are happening, maybe not simultaneously, but independently in Aztec mythology. So it seems to be a story we just like to tell because our brains, we don't like lizards, and we find a lot of dragon bones. I mean, not dragon bones. We find a lot of dinosaur bones, and we go, "That must have been a dragon." And a lot of them, specifically the Greek and Japanese versions of dragon slaying myths, the dragons usually come out of the sea. Part of that might be that sharks are a thing that exist in real life, and they're basically living dinosaurs. And yeah, you could believe that a version of a shark might exist on land in the next village over because some guy told you about it. And look, he's got some teeth. So like, you might believe in that as a human being when you're in an era where if the sun disappears for 30 seconds, you freak the fuck out because you think the gods are angry. But so it's maybe how this stuff developed independently, which is kind of interesting. Um, I think one of the classic ones is Andromeda being sacrificed to the sea beast Cetus in mythology. Cetus was replaced by the Kraken in the Clash of the Titans movie, which might also be this same year. Interesting year for fantasy. Um, Clash of the Titans. Let me just check. Yep, 81. Clash of the Titans. Um, so we got that in there. The Kraken is not from Greek mythology, by the way. It's from just later seafaring medieval mythology. Um, there's Hercules
Yeah,
versus.
but it was really cool. It was really cool when Liam Neeson was like, release the
Remember
Kraken,
when
so
that
it's
was a
fine. The
meme?
Greeks get that
Remember when
one.
that was like a meme forever?
Yes, that was fun.
There's Hercules versus the.
I like genuinely. I thought that was
Sure,
fun.
sure. Hercules versus the Hydra. I'm sure we all know Hercules fighting a lot of shit like that. Um, there's the eight-headed Japanese Orochi, which I believe like a Japanese god fights him to save. I'm not sure if it's a princess, but it's some sort of important uh, female being. Um, a version of Orochi appears in the Toho film The Three Treasures, which is a very obscure Toho kind of kaiju film. It's more a fantasy film, but if you want to ever see Toho's take on the fantasy genre, it exists. Um, there's and then there's the Norse story of Sigurd and Fafnir. I'm probably pronouncing all this shit wrong, but that's a major inspiration for Smaug the dragon. Uh, as we know, Tolkien was a big fan of Norse mythology and did his own translation of Beowulf. Um,
Mhm.
so, are there any classic kind of stories like that that stick out in your mind?
No, I always did like the Beowulf
Hmm.
myth though a lot. Um,
Yeah, Beowulf does end with a
yeah, most of my.
dragon, so and it's a
Mhm.
myth that like is all fucked up because it was clearly rewritten by Christians. Like there was clearly a pagan version of it, a Norse one, and then the
Mhm.
Christians rewrote it, which is a big debate, which is interesting when you deconstruct Beowulf as a story. Um, so I'm trying to think of like, all right, here's something. Did you ever read uh, The Paper Bag Princess by Robert Munsch? Was
No,
was Robert Munsch a staple in like your kindergarten era? That's when you would have been read this story. Um,
no, he was
Robert
not.
Munsch, who I believe recently passed away. Um, nope, still alive.
No, rest in peace.
Apologies, Robert Munsch.
Oh, never mind.
Apologies. I
Welcome
thought you were
back.
dead. I apologize. He did. I had a teacher who loved Robert Munsch, so like read us all of his little stories, and one of them was the Paper Bag Princess, which got is considered an early feminist work, which is kind of funny. It's from 1980, so a year before Dragonslayer. It has an endorsement from the National Organization of Women. The story is basically there's a beautiful princess who is plans to marry a prince, but a dragon comes in, kidnaps him, and burns down the castle, including all of her beautiful clothing. So she has to wear a paper bag, right? So that's all she can wear. She
Mhm.
goes, ends up rescuing the prince from the dragon, and then the prince is like, "You look like shit. Why are you dressed in a paper bag?" And the princess is rightfully like, "Well, fuck you. I'm not marrying you," and then skips off into the sunset.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's a good 32 pages. 32-page picture book tells that whole arc. And that, kids, is feminism. So I'm sorry. They made children's fantasy woke. They made children's books woke in 1980. Imagine if that came out now. Fucking people would kill each other. Um, but that was a classic of my childhood. I was trying to pick at your brain of what you grew up with. Give me something. What do you got?
Yeah. Well, like I remember Puff the Magic
Oh,
Dragon,
fuck
and then
that
that was
song.
quickly.
Fuck that.
Yeah,
Fuck
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Peter, Paul, Mary, you fucks.
Uh huh.
I'll fucking kill
Uh
all of
huh.
you.
I'm not saying I'm a fan of that, for the record.
Jackie Paper, you little
That
shit.
was quickly soured for me after junior high when kids started talking about how funny smoking weed
Yeah.
is.
Not.
Not even that anyone did it, like as far as I know at that age, but it was just like, oh, Puff the Magic Dragon, you know. Like I was thinking back on what I fucking read that was fantasy adjacent, and it was just like Bible shit. Like,
I mean,
really.
yeah.
Like I remember being really into, because Lord of the Rings comes out. I'm in middle school, right? And
You're like,
they click with me
can't wait
immediately.
for the passion.
I I mean, yeah.
Oh,
And
God.
then I see that and I'm like, oh
Oh, were
no.
you one of those
But I
kids?
mean that
Were
gets
you one of
me.
those kids that was like bussed in to watch the Passion of the Christ? Okay,
No, but
okay.
I was taken to it because it was like, this is like
Mm,
important, you know. And then I'm like, this is like, I didn't have the vernacular for it, but I was like, this is like ugly.
yeah,
Like, this is, I just feel
yeah.
miserable. Like, I don't.
I
Oh, is that
like
what
I
religion is? And
like
it's like, it's not supposed to
I
be.
like Jesus. This doesn't represent anything I like about the guy.
Yeah. I'm like, this kind of reminds me of Saw. It's like, it's not exactly the vibe you want to get with like
No.
an
Well, I
inspirational
mean, it
myth,
is if
I
you're a certain
guess.
type of Christian.
I mean, yeah. I mean, the Jigsaw Killer is more aspirational than Mel Gibson at this point.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So,
I'm sorry. Okay, but other fantasy stuff, like I remember just sticking it to the OG, the Bible for
mhm.
me. I remember like the Leviathan being like my brain clicked and I was like, are there fucking like sea monsters in the
Yeah.
Bible? And that was shut down very like quickly by one of my teachers, or what? Maybe it was like, because I did the whole Sunday school thing
Yeah.
for like communion. Maybe it was there where they shut it down, but I never lost track of that. And as I start like pushing against teachers more, I'm like, no, I think there are monsters in the Bible. And then I remember I had one teacher who was like a really nice guy. I might have brought him up
Mhm.
before, but he was definitely like Bible thumper
Mhm.
guy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I think he was a sixth grade teacher, I believe, for me. And he was someone who was like, he's the guy who was like, yeah, the Earth is only like 5,000 years old, stuff like
All
that,
right.
which is not
No,
true,
believe it or
for the
not.
record.
Just in case,
But
just
he
in
was
case
like,
anyone was confused out there. Earth is not,
yeah,
in fact, 5,000 years.
and
It's 10,000. I'm an old Earth creationist. Um,
yeah, but he was saying like, yeah, the dinosaurs, they could have lived alongside human beings, and obviously I didn't even really believe that back
mm,
then, but I do find that a very fascinating
yeah,
concept now. Like, someone should just do that movie,
yeah.
like do that fantasy movie.
Why not? Fuck it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I start reading like by myself through, like, I think I brought up before, Lord of the Flies, where I
Oh,
was
okay.
like, oh, this is a book I'm supposed to read eventually because it's an adult mature book, and then I'm like hooked, and then I'm like, what's I Am Legend? You
Oh,
know,
okay.
like
So that was the pivot there.
yeah. Yeah. So I don't go through like the fantasy ringers. I read like Alice in Wonderland, obviously for school. I brought up before. I missed out on The Hobbit. Every other school on planet Earth apparently read The Hobbit in middle school. I was not so
Yeah.
lucky. So I didn't read that until way later. Uh, what other
Well, there is that.
fantasy adjacent stuff? I'm trying to
I'm
think.
just interested in. I'm always interested in the few years when you're a kid where you're like, Santa Claus is real, Jesus is real, and some of the stories in the Bible allegedly happened, and there are monsters in those stories. So monsters are real.
Hmm.
And also, you watch like Dragon Ball Z on Cartoon Network, like you're still young enough or whatever, like that your conception of the world is so different and innocent. And then I believed in Santa Claus and aliens at the same time because of my upbringing. Because I famously told the story where my dad showed me aliens when I was 5, and then when it was over, I was like, "Well, I'm glad aliens aren't real." And he was like, "The fuck they aren't," and went on Google, early version of it, and showed me like images of Roswell, and was like, "Aliens are real." And so then I was like, "Okay, so Santa Claus, Jesus Christ, and aliens are all real," which is an interesting mindset to have at a young age.
And that's how you get Santa Claus Conquers the
I guess it
Martians.
is. But Santa Claus like is straight up just a guy on TV in that movie.
Yeah, they should remake that movie and make it live up to that premise.
Someone misspelled costume designer in the opening credits of Santa Claus Conquers the Martians.
That's so
Shows you
awesome.
how little anyone gave a shit. Uh,
No, there should be a movie where Santa Claus fights aliens.
I think there should just be more Santa movies in general that aren't snarky bullshit.
I don't know what you could possibly be talking about. What recent film, as of this recording and podcast uploading, could you possibly be
You
referring
know what? I
to?
don't even know the fucking name because fuck that movie.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's a movie that you'd think would star Ryan Reynolds. Let's
yeah,
put it
in
that
fact,
way.
I was still thinking Ryan Reynolds was in it just now.
Nope. Nope.
Uh, what is it's red? Is it like Red One or something? Like
Yeah, it's Red One.
oh, like Rogue One.
Sure. I don't know.
Hmm. Some of these
Who fucking
we need to
cares?
do a Santa movie that is just a Santa movie.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I really still like that first Christmas Chronicles. I think
yeah,
that's a great family Christmas
that's the
movie.
closest we've gotten to, frankly. And I do
Hmm.
love that. But most of that is Kurt Russell just being amazing. Like and
No, yeah, he's that's like one of the best family movie performances of the
yeah,
last 10 years.
yeah. I mean, like I said, it's just him. Like I needed the sequel to just be 90 minutes of him going around being like, "Hey, I know what you want for Christmas," like to every human being, and just fucking dropping Santa science on people, and then like they totally fucking whiffed it with that sequel, like one of the
Yeah.
biggest whiffs of all time, frankly. Um, Thanks, Chris Columbus. Are they gonna?
They should still do a third one. Just get someone
Yeah, gonna
else.
do a third one and then just do it like cheaper because we don't need to be at the North Pole for the whole fucking story. That's not what makes Santa fun. You
Yeah.
fuck.
Santa Claus should fight a dragon. Like, here's the thing. So, like, this is fantasy related. So, the red one, I haven't seen it. Obviously, I have no fucking interest in
Mhm.
that, right? Like, that's not what I'm going to this fantasy shit for. But they, like, militarize the North Pole, and people are like, oh, Santa allegedly runs it like a military operation to make the Christmas dates. And I'm like, no, you guys are overthinking it.
Yeah,
You guys are totally overthinking it. It's Santa Claus. He's magic. He's not real. He makes Christmas the most magical time of the
mhm.
year. That's
Yeah,
that's all you need. You do not need to explain the magic of Christmas. That's it's not a science, guys, you
yeah,
know? And I think something like Dragonslayer it
It should be.
part of why you're so receptive to it is that it is ultimately a very simple story,
Yes.
like something like Legend, a fundamentally uber simple
Yeah,
story
that like
that
it.
is just very like wordy when you
Yeah, it
explain
takes
it.
itself seriously, but not in an overly melodramatic type way, right? Like it knows
Hmm.
what it's playing in because we don't seem to do that. We either have movies that take themselves way
No.
too seriously or are snarky bullshit. It should be stated that the whole concept of Red One was already done better by Aardman Animation. Arthur Christmas. That's basically the plot. The Santa doesn't get kidnapped in it, but it is about
Hmm.
Santa not militarizing, but like how would Santa deliver presents in the modern era? And it's like with modern technology and stuff. And guess what? It's actually whimsical
Hmm.
and fun. So fuck off,
Yeah.
everyone. Um,
Oh. I'm glad you brought that movie
yeah,
up.
I'm a little. Oh, Jake
Yeah.
Kasdan did that. That's a shame. Um, did Red
Yeah.
One?
Well, it doesn't sound like that one was his fault
Yeah, it sounds like a
exactly.
lot went wrong with Red One. Um,
Yeah.
but it feels like they released that in theaters just to hurt Dwayne Johnson more.
Mm. Well, yeah, that was supposed to be a streaming
Yeah,
release,
that's what
and
I
then they
mean.
were like,
Like, someone was
yeah.
like, you know what, this has legs. And America was like, nope.
I mean, you want to know something else fucked up about it that's going to piss you off
Mm.
too? I saw reports that justifiably and correctly talked about the movie as like, if it was budgeted for a theatrical release, so not
Mm.
$250 million, it could have turned a decent profit. Which is, yeah, the correct thing to say, but also, like, doesn't it just fucking break your brain a little bit to be like, what do you mean budgeted for theaters, the one place it can make money? Why are you spending more money for when it won't make any money? Someone please explain to me the math behind this fucking crumbling
It's great
society.
that
Because what does
nothing,
that
yeah, like,
mean?
it's great that not only do we live under capitalism, but also capitalism doesn't even follow its own goddamn rules. It's all
I know.
bullshit. Like, it's all lies.
Yeah, it is not the reporters I'm getting angry at, obviously.
Yes.
It's just like, that's the craziest fucking thing I've ever heard in my
Yeah.
entire
Yeah.
life.
But then if you try and point that out, people get mad at you. But hey, whatever. Um,
I feel my blood pressure rising for the first time in my
Dave has a
life.
heart attack
This
live on the
tightening
podcast.
pain in my chest.
That is
Yeah.
building towards one of us having a heart attack live on the podcast.
I don't know. You've been chiller lately, and I've been getting angrier about stuff.
I don't know.
I think. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
think it's because my base level is so much higher than yours in terms of anger. So like when I'm chill, it's
Maybe,
like
yeah.
you're angry. Like, so like me being chill is still being like, yeah, but we should just round up some people and just start hitting them with bats. Like that's my baseline for
Yeah.
everything. Like fucking some old lady said something to me the other day, and if I could have thrown her out the window, I fucking would have if I could have gotten away with it. I will not repeat what she said, but she said something that would have been worthy of it. Trust me.
Okay. I believe you.
But
Um,
hey,
but speaking of stuff that looks not like shit,
dragons.
because Red One looks like
Yeah.
shit. Dragonslayer looks remarkable. It was shot by cinematographer Derek Van Lint.
Did
Do you know
you
who that is?
just say it because I probably know, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Okay, he shot Alien.
Okay, that
He
makes
shot Alien
that
for
makes
Ridley
sense. That
Scott.
makes sense.
Yeah.
And not a ton of credits. It looks like that's interesting. Um,
No, he did a lot of like commercials and other stuff like that, and
maybe he
like second unit
maybe he had a
stuff, whatever.
miserable experience on this movie and was like, you know what, I'm gonna be a cinematographer. Uh,
Yeah.
but I should say,
Yeah, like he was even offered the Blade Runner position for cinematographer. He turned it down, and then Jordan Cronenweth goes in there, and then James Cameron even wanted
mm,
Van Lint on Aliens, and then Van Lint was like,
no,
no, but my protege is this guy named Adrian
he
Biddle.
said
So maybe like this guy just like was fucking burnt
he
out.
didn't want to work with Ridley Scott and James Cameron. I find that hard to believe.
Yeah. Well,
Like, if you want to be
you
you either
know.
want to put up with some of the most insane personalities on the planet, but be attached to absolute masterpieces, or you just want to be a chill guy who's like, yeah, I'll throw a Dragon Slayer out there once. That's all I need. I'm good. I'm happy with that. So,
He also did special effects
mm,
photography for a while, and then tapped out.
okay.
So
Yeah.
he worked all over. It's just not like it's the type of position and roles that don't get the spotlight very
Mm.
often. So shout out Derek Van
This
Lent,
is
who passed away in
all right,
2010.
right on. Shout out to him. This is a great 4K transfer, by the way. It was recently released on 4K. I think it's one of my favorite looking 4Ks. I don't have a ton at this point, but I really like it, and it's one of the few steelbooks I actually like the art of the steelbook for. So
Is it that poster on Wikipedia, or is it like even
it's
better?
a better version of the poster on the slip that comes with it, and then it's like dragon art on the steelbook. So
Oh,
it
that's
actually looks
awesome.
really good. I really like it. Um, as
You told me to hold off until I watched
mm,
it before blind buying the 4K. I would buy the 4K. I think I'm gonna pick up the
okay, yeah,
4K
wait for a
soon.
sale and get the 4K. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I would recommend it. It's a really great looking transfer. Makes me really want to see this on the big screen. Like this is one of those dream movies to see on the big screen. Probably won't ever happen considering it's owned by the Walt Disney Company and Paramount. Like it's like a weird thing where they both own it.
Oh, it's one of
Yeah,
those.
and that which could explain
Oh
because I
shit.
think it's streaming on Paramount but not Disney Plus. Like it's in that weird limbo state that some of these movies exist in right now. Um,
I saw it on Pluto TV. So
okay, yeah, I mean you can watch it with ads there. Yeah, it's on
yeah.
Paramount Plus through Apple TV. Great. So yeah, if you want to see Dragon Slayer, um, you wanted to talk about the cast.
I did. Mostly Peter
Peter
McNichol.
McNichol.
Do you know
Yeah, famed character actor Peter McNichol, who
yeah.
it's suddenly
Here you go. You go
well,
first because I have a
it's
thing.
just crazy to like kind of be like, yeah, the guy from Ghostbusters 2, Adam's Family Values. Yeah, he was a lead, an incredibly earnest lead of a fantasy film, right? It's weird when you circle back to it.
The first time I ever saw him in anything was in 24.
Oh, all right. That
He plays Tom Lennox, who was like a sort of like weaselly politician in the White House working for the president who wasn't super like supportive, but also like there were certain lines he wouldn't cross. So like when they try to like it's fucking it's 24.
I
I
only
mean,
take
just
order
just
from the
assume
president.
it's
I'm
insane.
not taking orders from you. I only take
Yeah.
orders directly from the president. Uh,
Yeah, and I just remember like because obviously it's a very conservative show. Just assume it
yes.
was an insane plot line that he got involved
Yeah.
in. But I just remember there was like a point where you think like, oh, he's gonna be the bad guy, and he's like, oh no, he's actually gonna like try to save the day, and it's not good enough because of his own personal failings. And it was just like, oh, that was interesting. Who is this guy? And then he goes on to voice Doctor Octopus in the Spectacular
Right
Spider-Man
on.
series, which is really great.
Good choice. Good
Yeah,
choice.
very good interpretation there.
Mm,
And then my fucking favorite political show of all
mm.
time, Veep. He's in a handful of episodes, but it feels like he's in the show the entire time.
A lot
Like
of people
he's
have
only
that.
in 9
But also,
episodes.
Veep is one of those shows where it's like 65 episodes spread across 7 seasons. So there's like a
Mm-hmm.
lot less of Veep in a weird way than you remember, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like some of the episodes, some of the seasons aren't even 10 episodes. Which so like when if someone like that pops up, like it has a bigger impact. Interesting. I'm surprised that you came that late to him because he kind of ran circles around in my childhood. Like he was kind of a regular in stuff when I was a kid, right? Like
Yeah. Did you see Ally McBeal?
no, I was not an Ally McBeal fan as a child.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I just because I haven't seen any of it, but I just see he's in 103
Yeah, I think he
episodes.
was a
He was
regular
even
on
a
it.
writer and
Yeah.
director. Yeah.
Um, but I know him from, like I said, this, but mainly like Ghostbusters 2, Adam's Family Values, which I think is what most people of our generation know him from at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Baby Geniuses, which was unfortunately a regular watch when I was a kid. Uh, a movie that like genuinely makes me ill when I think about it now. that's a
Oh.
that's an awful awful movie. Um, and he's also, he has a good supporting performance in the TV movie Recount, which is about the 2000s election. Oh no, not Recount, Game Change, which is about Sarah
Mm.
Palin. From like I believe all the same people that did Recount. But he was in Game Change. He played one of like McCain's advisors. That was like, yeah, Sarah Palin, that's a good choice. And he's kind of portrayed as like the dumb one of the team, being like, yeah, what are the implications of doing this? No one will remember her after the election. And it's like, well, uh,
Well,
that actually has one of the best framing devices of any movie I've ever seen, if I'm being perfectly honest. Yeah.
really.
Uh, uh, Steve Schmidt, who's kind of become an annoying centrist in this era, even though he's like a total Republican, right? Like he was one of the first guys to be like
Mm.
Trump is bad. He was the strategist for the McCain campaign, right? And in the mythology of America, if you're a neoliberal, McCain was the last good Republican, right? Like that's the myth.
Yeah, yeah.
Whatever. We don't need.
That fucking video always goes around and
Yeah,
shit, you know.
but Steve Schmidt, it's him on Anderson Cooper in 2010, so after the election, and Anderson Cooper goes, "Would you, if you could do it over again, would you not pick Sarah Palin? Like, would you make a different decision?" And they hold on Steve Schmidt. Then they do a flashback to the whole events of the 2008 election, and then they just come back to right after that question was asked, and he goes, "You don't get to do do-overs in life." So he in 2 seconds he flashed back to everything that went wrong with choosing Sarah Palin, and that was his summation of it. I really love that framing device. Um, yeah, probably a
All
weirdly
right, so maybe,
aged film right now. So maybe
yeah,
maybe
maybe give it a rewatch if you're up for it, I
yeah, do
guess.
Veep first though. Veep
People.
you'll probably vibe with a lot more
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, and he has one of the single funniest
Hmm.
moments in the history of
Hmm.
television.
How am I doing? Eating so much pussy, I'm shitting clits, son.
Hey!
What?
This is an elementary school. Watch your spewing mouth, you animal!
Yeah, that was amazing that show even existed, frankly. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, great show. Great show.
Yeah. Wonderfully miserable ending also, which
Yes.
is also kind of
Well,
optimistic.
that's what's weird. It has an optimistic ending, except for our protagonist. Like,
Yeah.
it's funny where like the joke is on her. I mean, look, that post Hillary, that's how that show had to end. Like it
Oh
might have
yeah,
it might
no,
have it might
completely.
have gone a little bit differently had that election gone a different direction. But what are you going to do it now? Um,
Yeah.
but I'm surprised they haven't tried
And then last.
bringing Veep back. I'm surprised that hasn't been something that like they floated, even though that show has like a definitive ending. Like I'm surprised. Although Iannucci's doing stuff, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, he's always working.
yeah,
So
he did Death of Stalin, right? Which
yeah,
is yeah,
yeah,
that's a pretty good thing from the Veep guy post 2016 election. Uh,
yeah. He leaves the last two seasons to do that movie, I
oh, okay.
think, which I finally saw, and it's like totally worth that. um, Last thing on Peter McNichol, and then we could highlight anything else we want to highlight and start wrapping up. He was also the Mad Hatter in the Arkham games, the Arkham
Oh, right on.
trilogy
I totally
specifically.
forgot that. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, very fun little mini boss that pops up in
yeah.
those, even in Arkham Knight.
Peter McNichol, yeah, it's just crazy. Like I said, like I think he's now firmly a character actor in a lot of our minds, but here he is in the Luke Skywalker role, right? And this was
Hmm.
him. Like I think he was in like one Broadway show before this, and then he's the lead of this movie. Um, which I
Yeah.
think is true for both the leads of the film. Um, although Caitlin Clark, I don't think had even really done Broadway before Dragonslayer. Um, it was like she was in like local.
She done off
Yeah, but she's
Broadway.
done like
That counts.
yokel, local theater type stuff, and then was suddenly the second lead of this film, and great, frankly. Died kind of young. Died at age 52 in 2000, which is a shame. She didn't do a lot of movies, but she's in another one of my favorite films. She is the female lead of Penn and Teller Get Killed.
Oh,
You'll
okay.
you'll never believe how that movie ends. Did you know
Yeah,
Penn,
I hadn't seen her in anything. She's really good
she's
in
really
this.
good in this, and in retrospect, maybe explains some things in being disguised as a boy for a huge chunk of it. It's so I look
No, that
look. This is something. Look, how many times has this come up now on the podcast of like disguising yourself as the other sex in a fantasy story, right? And now, like, this is the most controversial issue in America, apparently. And it's like literally that's stuff that happens in the Odyssey. Odysseus dresses up as a woman at one point in the Odyssey.
yeah.
Like,
And I mean, hey, even outside of fantasy, it's just important to remember throughout human history, basically every culture has some aspect of either just outright non-binary roots or people undergoing like a version of
yes.
what we would consider transitioning now.
But I'm just saying that it's Bugs Bunny shit too. Like it was the
Yes,
most
and it was like
normalized thing
fun and
on
awesome
the
then.
planet ever. Like it was something that no one gave a shit about, and now apparently it decided the election according to people who we shouldn't listen to. But so everything is so dumb now. I used to have really complicated political opinions. I think my conclusion is just everyone's dumb. I'm sorry, I don't want to be that cynical. Everyone's just really dumb and stupid. So that's what went wrong.
No, you're catching me at either a good time or a bad time because I agree. I was driving back for this, and some fucker is doing that multi-lane change on the freeway. Some fuckhead, and they're driving a big old truck, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna let them ease. I see them coming, so I'm gonna slow down because I can't pass them up. They're coming too fast, and as they're going through the lanes, I'm like, are they getting slower?
Oh God!
And mind you, big truck. They also have something attached to the back. I don't know if it was like a giant fucking barbecue grill or something for construction. I could not tell, but it was fucking massive and like mechanical. And they're clearly going for a freeway exit, and I'm like, I can't slow down anymore. There's someone too close to me. I'm trying here. No. I'm fine. No one got hurt. But I basically had to swerve out of the way, or they would have fucking swiped me into the wall. And when I swerved out of the way, I fucking ran straight into a pothole, and my hubcap of my tire just fucking
Goddamn.
flew off on the freeway.
Everyone, yeah.
And people, I truly believe this. My most conservative take is that no one knows how to fucking drive anymore because everyone was inside for so long. They didn't teach the next generation how to drive well because the air was poison, and it's still technically poison, and no one puts on their turn signals anymore. I thought that was just basic courtesy. Yeah, I only get conservative about driving. That's my thing.
I think that's conservatives' fault, though, because I think the crisis that the American male is facing in its masculinity has that thing where like pickup trucks are luxury vehicles now, and what you were describing, I think, sums up America perfectly. I think what you just described is that you had to get out of the way of someone who is driving a truck who should not be driving a truck, who would be perfectly fine driving a smaller vehicle, probably, right? Who would be totally normal and no one would judge them, but because they're flexing so hard with this truck apparently dragging a grill, maybe.
Yeah, something, I don't know, it was fucking big. I made the right choice by crashing into the pothole, basically, and maybe fucking up the rest of my tire. I need to check it for air and shit now.
And our democracy have to swerve and hit a pothole. That's what's happened.
Yes!
That's what's happened to the world now. It's the fucking cyber trucks everywhere. So that's what's going on here. That's the dragon we're trying to slay. It's
Nice save.
no, really, because it is such. There is actually a video. I can't remember. Someone put it out. Someone did a video on YouTube that went semi-viral in the way that old YouTube videos used to, where it is the slaying the dragon myth, and it's clearly just a metaphor for global warming. And that is
Mm.
what slaying the dragon kind of is, you know? Like, it's this thing where you don't think, all logic tells you can't beat it, but you go and beat it anyway, right? And in this
Mm.
postmodern world we live in, like, divine right of kings doesn't exist anymore. We essentially live in a secular society, despite what the Christians are trying to do right now. And the dragons to slay are something like capitalism, like global warming, like, frankly, toxic masculinity, where they all seem impossible, and we might not do it right on the first try. As this movie shows and life seems to be showing us, uh, but that doesn't mean it can't be done, right? And
Mm-hmm.
part of it is we have to let go of the world that made the dragons too. I mean, that's also inherent to the dragon slaying myth, right? Like, Ulrich
Yeah.
has to die at the end. Spoilers. To end the dragon, which he very explicitly says that, wizards and sorcerers made dragons, like it's their fault. So he has to perish along with them in order for the world to continue. Now the world continues into, a certain level of Christian fraud that we now recognize. But it was a transition that happened, and we also got through that one. I also think the character of Tyrion, which is, yes, directly inspired Tyrion's name in Game of Thrones, although it's spelled differently here. Tyrion is the cautionary example of what belief, like, you can't replace a certain type of belief with a belief in nothing. Because Tyrion doesn't believe in anything, right? Tyrion does not he
Mm-hmm.
knows the king's a fraud, but serves him. He doesn't believe in the church, and he doesn't believe in the wizard, the magic. He doesn't believe in anything. He just essentially believes in power and associating with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, it's that's why he's more the dragon than the dragon itself in the story, which is why I think Peter McNichol kills him as opposed to he doesn't actually kill the dragon in the story.
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting cautionary tale for the modern era, where I think that we live with a certain level of secular emptiness, and I think that a beast man like Donald Trump fills that void, even though he does align himself with insane Christian beliefs that most people have rightfully left behind and reject, right? It's how a guy
Mm-hmm.
like that can essentially get into power despite the vast majority of his positions being deeply unpopular. Uh, so it's why, it's why atheism will kind of never really work as, like, a thing to rally around, right? You can't rally around a non-belief. Um, so I guess that's the question of what are we going to believe in going forward if we're not going to believe in capitalism.
It's a good
It
question.
is an interesting question. I do think it.
I mean, ideally each other,
Well,
but like you can't just say that and
I
like
will say
you still have to have like a tangible thing, I
I do
guess.
think the answer is hidden in our beliefs about gender and sexuality. I do think that is the answer lies somewhere there. Um, I think that we've hit a point in humanity where you can genuinely change your sex. I think that hints at what the future of humanity should look like in a good way, um, and makes humanity worth fighting for, frankly. If I'm going to believe in trans rights, I have to believe in the right for humanity to exist. So I think that I think that's why it's such a threat to the established world. Um, so that's my take anyway.
Oh, very well said.
Hmm. I mean,
Do you have anything else you would like to address about Dragonslayer? That was kind of a high note. I don't know if you want to touch that anymore.
yeah, I kind of get to these notes, but then I also realized, like, there was other stuff I didn't talk about. Just a shout out to, like, Ralph Richardson's performance as Ulrich. And we already shouted out Ian McDermott, right? Um,
Yeah,
so there's a
yeah.
lot of great performances in here.
Um, yeah.
So
He's not in the movie super long, or maybe just doesn't feel like he's in the movie very long. But Sidney Bromley is Hodge. I really
oh
liked
yeah,
Hodge.
yeah, Hodge is fun. He gets shot with a fucking arrow. Um,
Yeah.
poor guy.
I mean, the death is kind of mean, where he's like, "Oh, good, he saved him." Oh, he turns around. Oh
Yeah,
no, it's like a gag almost. It's not intentionally, but it feels like it. And I'm like,
just
no.
a little bit like message for you, sir, from fucking Monty Python. But
Yeah.
Concord lived. He
Oh.
lived in that. So who knows? Yeah, we didn't talk about the plot, which is like because the plot is kind of like secondary. It's because again, it's more about the motions of a dragon slaying story. Um,
Hmm.
I think anyway. The other interesting element though
I would
is the
agree.
slow like Christianization of everyone, right? Like even with Ian
Hmm.
McDermott when he gets burninated, because you can't just stand there and be like God will protect me, you'll get set on fire. But we see basically his stuff in his death get passed on to other people in the village, right? Like
Hmm.
we see that everyone by the end like the village is being baptized, and then even though they had nothing to do with it, the Christians and the king take credit for slaying the dragon, uh, which is a funny note to end the story on. Um,
No, no, it is. Yeah, and
so
much more
it's
cynical
yeah,
than
very
I
cynical. I
expected,
mean,
frankly.
well, that is just like if you're a student of history, it's history's written by
Hmm.
the victors, and that's not necessarily. A lot of people always interpret that to just mean that like the people who lost get screwed in history, which is true. But it also means that guys take a lot more credit for things than they should, right? Like it could be like
Hmm.
we could have been working for the same goal, but someone's going to make sure their name goes down in history more than the other. In fact, it's like it can go back to the Saint George and the Dragon myth, where I believe the origins of it, Saint George was with three other knights, and we don't even remember their fucking names. So that's history, man. Unfortunately, you have to just accept that about history. That even if you achieve something great, someone's probably going to take credit from it for you. So if you're okay living with that, you can get through life.
Yeah. Did I ever tell you I actually had the idea for The Godfather back in the
Oh, we
day?
should start saying that and see if it sticks.
I know, yeah.
Diego
I actually directed The
Diego
Godfather, but I
Crespo.
never got credit for
Yeah,
it.
I mean it's like that thing where like so many plays were like attributed to Shakespeare over the years, even though Shakespeare like had nothing to do with them. And it took like a lot of work to figure out who really wrote those things. Or there's that great line in Gangs of New York, uh, where Brendan Gleeson, who's essentially one of the smarter guys in Gangs of New York, uh, he pulls DiCaprio aside after DiCaprio saves Bill the Butcher, and he's like, "That was downright Shakespearean, son. No, Shakespeare's right. He wrote the King James Bible." Like, which is like, well, no, he didn't, but
Yeah.
that's what people believed then. So uh, that's it's history. History. We're all forgotten in history, ultimately, and we're all lumped under one guy who probably didn't even exist. So
We all need to get lumped into Trogdor.
Trogdor, the Burninator. Yeah, that's maybe the game. Maybe I was
Yeah.
wrong about that whole trans rights thing. Maybe the lesson is we should embrace the dragon.
Yeah.
Bring back
Cut to
dragons.
100 years
Bring them
later.
back. Bring them back. Let's burninate the countryside.
Bring him back. Bring him.
That's my campaign slogan.
We have to bring back dragons. Bring
Bring
back
back
dragons.
dragons.
Bring back dragons. Yeah. We need to stop trying to bring dinosaurs back to life. Let's bring
Let's
dragons
bring
back to
dragons
life.
back.
And-
I am fucking the
just
master.
just don't address the very obvious problem with
No,
that.
I'm running on that
And then
platform, and I will be the head of the Senate within 15 years. that that is.
I was gonna say in 15 months.
I mean, I would hope that because then we would speed run some shit if we get that crazy that quick. But
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, that was Dragonslayer, one of my favorite movies of all time, and Diego liked it too.
I also enjoyed it. Yeah, no, this is a great movie. Especially if you're into fantasy stuff, I cannot imagine you wouldn't
If
like
you've
this
been
movie.
enjoying this whole
Like,
retrospective, you'll like this movie.
yeah, yeah. Um, Man, that's 15 episodes in. Do we know what we want to do next? I have an idea of what we could do next. I have the list in front of me.
I will let you choose. Diego, my friend.
I think this is, considering the note we just ended on, I think we should talk about Warcraft next.
All right, you know what? Fuck yeah, let's do it.
Do you see it?
Yeah, I do see it. I do see it. There's a scene directly lifted from this movie in Warcraft, so that makes a lot of sense. But
yeah, I think it fits the way the discussions have gone.
Yes.
And also, this is mostly where my fantasy upbringing, besides Lord of the Rings, comes from.
All right.
It all coalesces in 2016 with maybe 100 other people on planet Earth who saw the movie.
Yeah, same. I think Duncan Jones, though, is finally doing a new movie.
No, he did another movie after that.
No, he did, but we don't talk about that one. I'm saying now he's doing another movie.
Okay.
Which is, he's doing an adaptation of Rogue Trooper from the 2000 AD comic.
Oh, he finally got that off the ground. Good for him.
Yeah, it sounds, I mean, who knows? Who knows in this day and age? Stuff they say is getting made doesn't get made. But
yeah, I do root for him.
I do, yeah. Like Mute aside, which is like a really bad movie, like not kind of like like Oops bad movie, like really bad. I do kind of like, yeah, but I want the guy who made Moon to come back, right?
Yeah. Yeah, same. But okay, Dragonslayer. Links down to our stuff below. Matt, thanks for joining me as always. Check out our stuff in the other links. Check out Blue Sky, where I basically just post pictures. Matt is also there.
I'm posting and I'm having tons of fun. Like I'm posting like I used to on Twitter. Not to be that guy, but Blue Sky does kind of have, I can have fun here again. Like even with everything going on in the world, like which is just kind of nice because it's been a minute since I felt like I could have fun on social media.
Yeah, that was nice when social media had that, just like as a standard.
Yeah. I mean, look, we might be reverting to that. Like, it feels like we're like everything's gonna like at some point kind of take a shift backwards, and hopefully it'll happen in just only in 4 years or less. I'm hoping.
Please, please.
In an optimistic world, 3 days into February would be my hope. I would also be fine with 6 months. But we will see where things are at.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. If you didn't like this film, well, like and subscribe anyways, because I bet you're gonna find another fantasy film you do like. We have been professionally unprofessional.
Peace.